Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Roxana Sikorsky. Lorraine and Jeffrey Sikorsky were a happy married couple, they living in a beautiful dream home in a prosperous small town in Michigan, which had a population of under 10,000. Lorraine worked as a nurse, while Jeffrey was an engineer. They have successful careers and good incomes, however, they feel deprived without children. Both Lorraine and Jeffrey deeply wanted to become parents. They often found themselves enviously watching their neighbors' children go to school, realizing that they were missing the joy of parenthood. In 2004, after careful consideration, they decided to adopt their child. However, they quickly realized that adoption was difficult and had many hurdles. In search of a solution, some friends suggested a simpler option: travel to Poland to adopt there. Then, they contacted an orphanage, received approval to adopt, and traveled to Poland to select a child. They even thought about adopting more than one child. Lorraine was particularly drawn to a 4-year-old girl named Roxana, she feeling a strong emotional bond with her. As they talked, Roxana began to call Lorraine Mom, which filled Lorraine with joy. Feel secure about your choice. Jeffrey also liked Roxana and supported the decision. Lorraine and Jeffrey discovered that Roxana had a younger brother and sister who lived in the same orphanage. The siblings had been removed from an unstable family and were very close to one another, with Roxana taking care of them as the oldest. Lorraine and Jeffrey decided to adopt all 3 children together so they wouldn't be separated. They believed it was important for the siblings to grow up together. Excited to return home, they envisioned their new life as a big, happy family filled with the sounds of children laughing. Their dream became a reality when they completed all the necessary paperwork and returned home with their 3 new children. Lorraine and Jeffrey's 3 adopted children quickly adapted and settled into their new life. Their children find studying English very easy. Jeffrey continued working, while Lorraine took a break from her job to care for the home and children. Then, children started school and had no difficulties with their studies. The family was attached and happy for 10 years, until Roxana entered her teenage years. In 2014, at 15, Roxana started having behavioral issues. She rebelled, spent all day playing computer games, do poorly in school, and stopped listening to her parents. Worried about Roxana's behavior, Lorraine and Jeffrey reached out to a psychologist for help. Roxana was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder. She received medication and was later diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder, which stemmed from neglect and abuse in her childhood. This disorder affects a child's ability to form an emotional relationship with a foster parent and can lead to fear, hypervigilance, difficulty interacting with peers, and exhibit aggressive behavior towards self and others. Therapy had a positive impact on Roxana, helping her feel calmer. However, her life took a turn when a guy named Michael Angelo Rivera reached out to her on social media, claiming to be 18 years old. Roxana was thrilled to receive attention from him. Michael, a high school student who was 4 years older than Roxana, began chatting with she. He praised her, making her feel comfortable and special. She shared her story of being adopted and the difficulties she had faced, and Michael listened empathetically, making her feel understood. One day, Michael invited Roxana to meet him, and she accepted. She dyed her hair, got dressed, and headed to the library to meet him. Roxana was petite and weighed only 40 kilograms, which made her seem fragile. Michael was captivated by her. Their meeting went well, and from then on, they started seeing each other at the library every day. Her parents were unaware that she was talking to Michael. They believed she was only going to the library to study and that her meetings with Michael were just coincidental. Later on, it was revealed that Michael was actually 23 years old, not 18 years old like he said, making him 8 years older than Roxana. Despite this age difference, Roxana was so blindly in love with him that she didn't even realize it. This was her first love, and she was already fantasizing about marrying Michael to escape her parents' disapproval, hoping they could live happily together. Roxana had difficulty bonding with her adoptive parents because of her mental illness, reactive attachment disorder. Although her parents cared for her, but she quickly became more deeply attached to Michael. To outsiders, their relationship appeared unhealthy. Her friends warned her against dating Michael because he appeared much older, but Roxana dismissed their concerns, thinking they were just jealous since they didn't have boyfriends. As a result, Roxana started to pull away from her friends and family, spending all her time with Michael. She was often with him and rarely came home. Her parents, Lorraine and Jeffrey, noticed her changed behavior and eventually learned about her boyfriend. They were taken aback. To them, Michael seemed too mature, and they felt the age gap was inappropriate, fearing it could lead to negative outcomes. Lorraine and Jeffrey read their messages and recognized that their relationship was not healthy. Roxana's parents had a serious conversation with her, asked her to stop all contact with Michael. However, Roxana strongly opposed this request, telling her parents that she couldn't imagine her life without him, which alarmed them. In response, her parents took away her phone to prevent her from communicating with Michael and began to closely monitor her activities. Despite this, Roxana continued to find ways to reach out to him. Roxana's parents had a hard time reaching her, but she refused to listen. Michael started visiting their house at night, and Roxana would sneak out through the window to meet him. One night, the police discovered them in a car together and sent Roxana home. This situation had worsened, prompting Jeffrey and Lorraine to discuss taking drastic measures, as they suspected that Roxana and Michael were involved in a sexual relationship. Roxana's parents took her to meet the doctor for a checkup, and their worst fears were confirmed. Outraged, they decided to hold Michael responsible for corrupting their daughter. They collected DNA evidence so they could report him to the police. However, their plan failed when the police refused to accept the report, as Roxana claimed that everything had been consensual and that she was not raped. Although the police had seen Roxana and Michael in the car earlier, and they knew that Michael was much older than her, they took no action. Roxana's parents were very worried and did not want her to get involved with Michael. So they decided to take the case to court to protect their daughter from him. After Roxana learned of this, she begged her parents not to proceed, but they were resolute, leading to a tragic outcome. Michael was aware of Roxana's parents' intentions against him, which upset him. Both he and Roxana wanted to escape to a distant place, but they lacked the financial means to do so and feared Roxana's parents would search for them. Consequently, they devised a malicious plan to eliminate the obstacle posed by Roxana's family, believing it would allow them to be happy together. At around 2 a.m. on October 17, 2014, 15-years-old Roxana entered her 12-years-old younger brother's bedroom holding a knife. She approached his bed while he was asleep, covered his mouth with her hand, and began stabbing him in the throat. The boy screamed, and Roxana left him bleeding and went to her 11-years-old sister's room. Their parents rushed to help the boy and were horrified by what they saw. They looked into Roxana's room and found her standing by her bed with the knife. Roxana was frozen in place. Their father, Jeffrey, quickly grabbed her. Meanwhile, Michael, who had been waiting outside, was on the phone texting Roxana to check on her. As the parents called 911, Roxana seized the opportunity to jump out of the window and escape to meet Michael. Doctors arrived and assisted the injured boy, who was crying and covered in blood. Thankfully, he survived and made a full recovery. The police placed Roxana and Michael on the wanted list, and they were eventually arrested in Detroit at Michael's apartment, where they were planning their wedding. Roxana was charged with attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder, while Michael faced 7 charges, including conspiracy to commit murder. Turns out, Roxana and Michael devised a plan to eliminate her entire family. Roxana was supposed to kill her family members one by one, starting with her younger brother, then her sister, and finally her parents. Fortunately, the plan did not succeed. The night before the incident, Roxana and Michael were texting. During their conversation, Roxana began to panic and reconsidered her decision, realizing that these were her biological siblings, whom she had cared for in her childhood, and she loved her adoptive parents. Despite Roxana's change of heart, but Michael pressured her by saying that he was just there to make sure it happened. Under his influence, she took a knife and went to confront her younger brother. Due to Roxana being only 15 years old, there was a debate about how she should be tried. The prosecutor argued that the severity of the crime warranted treating her as an adult, and the judge concurred. Roxana was placed in a juvenile detention center but was later moved to a psychiatric clinic for treatment. Roxana's parents pleaded for leniency on her behalf. They preferred that she receive treatment in a clinic rather than face imprisonment. They held Michael responsible for the incident, claiming he manipulated Roxana and coerced her into committing these serious offenses. They believed she was unable to understand her actions due to her illness, which made her reliant on him. In court, Roxana apologized to her parents for not meeting their expectations and promised to do better. Her parents hired a skilled lawyer, spending $30,000 to help ensure their daughter remained free. However, after that, Roxana was assigned a public defender. The public defender advised her to accept a plea bargain with the prosecution to reduce her sentence, and she ultimately agreed. Roxana pleaded guilty only to assault with intent to murder and received a prison sentence of 10 to 20 years, with the possibility of parole in 2024. Roxana's parents think the sentence is unfair and too severe for their daughter, who they believe was influenced by Michael. They feel that Michael should face the harshest penalty. Lorraine, 54 years old, Roxana's mother, expressed to the press her urgent need for psychological support. She is concerned that her daughter is still at risk and that being in an adult prison could seriously damage her already vulnerable state. Lorraine also questioned how this sentence could truly help her daughter, arguing that it does not serve justice. Lorraine criticized the public defender, believing he was uninterested in protecting Roxana's interests. Instead of fighting for her, he made a deal that sent her to prison. The family was unaware that Roxana intended to make this deal. Had they known, they would have advised her against it. Lorraine is convinced that if there had been no deal, the jury would have found Roxana not guilty. Roxana's father, Jeffrey, who is 50 years old, was upset with the way the trial was conducted. He worried about Roxana's safety in prison, as she is still very young and vulnerable. Their concerns grew after Roxana threatened to harm herself, intensifying their fears about her future. The parents also blamed the police for not arresting Michael, who was found in a car with Roxana despite having an inappropriate relationship with her. They believed that if the police had taken appropriate action, Roxana's situation could have been prevented. The trial of Michael began, during which he blamed Roxana for everything. He claimed that it was her decision and plan, insisting he was not present at the crime scene and only supported her from outside. However, their correspondence contradicted his claims, showing that he was the one who directed her actions and masterminded the operation. As a result, Michael Angelo Rivera was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After listening to her parents, Roxana withdrew her guilty plea, blamed her defense attorney, and requested a new trial, but her request was denied. She is currently serving her sentence in the Women's Correctional Colony of Huron Valley. Since the attack, Roxana's siblings have undergone significant changes. They experienced severe psychological trauma and needed rehabilitation. For a long time, they were unable to sleep in their own rooms and suffered from nightmares. Thankfully, their mother reports that their lives have recently improved, and the children are now looking forward to Roxana's return home. The case of Munchi Ji. In 2012, Munchi Ji, a Chinese citizen, enrolled at the University of Missouri, Columbia, USA, where she earned a master's degree in mechanical and aerospace engineering. One of her professors was impressed by her expertise and offered her a job at biomaterials company. While working there, Munchie met her future husband, Joe Elledge, in September 2015, as he was pursuing his engineering studies. They both worked at the same company, where Munchie was Joe's boss. Their feelings for each other grew quickly, and just a year and 7 months after their first meeting, Joe proposed to Munchie on September 22, 2017, on a trail at Rock Bridge Memorial State Park, called the Devil's Refrigerator. They got married only 2 weeks later. Munchie's parents think they rushed into marriage due to the impending expiration of Munchie's visa. They felt that American citizens couldn't fully grasp the difficulty that immigrants face. Although Munchie is financially independent, but she still has difficulty obtaining citizenship. After nearly 5 months, Munchie received a promotion at work. Soon after, she discovered she was pregnant. Munchie and Joe decided that she should decline the promotion and leave her job to focus entirely on motherhood, even though she was the primary breadwinner for their family at that time. Their income decreased significantly, but it was sufficient for their essential needs. In October 2018, Joe and Munchie's family gave birth to their first daughter. However, after her birth, Munchie and Joe began to face difficulties. Although their marriage appeared normal to outsiders, only Munchie's parents were aware of the reality. After quitting her job, Munchie felt completely isolated. She doesn't communicate with anyone. Her small child became her only companion, along with daily phone calls from her mother. Traditionally, Munchie's parents had to travel from China to the United States before she gave birth, to help care for and support her. They lived in a separate house nearby and visited Munchie daily, but their appearance increased tension between Munchie and her husband, Joe. On October 9, 2019, a year after Munchie's daughter was born, Munchie's parents were alarmed when they didn't receive a call from her. Unable to reach her, they sent a family friend who lived close by to check on Munchie. When the friend arrived, Joe answered the door and revealed that Munchie was missing. He shared a troubling account. On the evening of October 8th, he had tried to give Munchie a massage and flirt with her, but she rejected him, saying she needed sleep because she had important plans for the next day. Joe stated that he woke up the next morning to find Munchie gone. She had left behind her car keys, mobile phone, wallet, and, most importantly, did not take their daughter with her. Despite her absence, Joe did not immediately report her missing, believing she was simply out for a walk and would return. A family friend attempted to call Munchie but was unsuccessful. Eventually, under pressure, Joe reported her disappearance to the police, but rather than calling 911, he reached out to the non-emergency number 311. Munchie's parents were unaware of this and were convinced the police were actively searching for their daughter. On October 15, 2019, a week after Munchie went missing, her husband, Joe Elledge, reported her disappearance to the Columbia, Missouri Police Department. He recounted to detectives the same information he had shared with a family friend. Joe described Munchie as appearing stressed the night before she went missing. He mentioned that she went to bed after telling him she had important matters to attend to the next morning. When he asked her 3 times who she was meeting, she did not provide clear answers. He suspected she might be having an affair and secretly meeting another man. Later that day, Joe informed investigators that he had discovered notes on Munchie's computer discussing an affair. Joe said Munchie texted a man from China. The message ended with her expressing sadness that her husband was not interested in her. Joe speculated that Munchie might have left him for this man, potentially abandoning their daughter for a new life. He expressed his love for their daughter and his desire for Munchie to return home safely. From the outset, investigators were skeptical of Joe's account and considered him a suspect. Joe's family hired a lawyer, who revealed that Munchie and the man China with had intimate and emotional conversations via text messages. The main question is whether Mengqi went to see the man who lives in China and where she is now. The police found out that Joe, upon realizing his wife was missing, did not call 911, but instead contacted 311. This made them even more suspicious of him. He willingly returned to the Columbia Police Department for further questioning. Investigators grew increasingly suspicious of his account, particularly when Joe mentioned taking long drives to find new walking spots instead of searching for his missing wife. Additionally, it was noted that Joe closed the door before leaving their apartment. It seemed like Joe didn't care how Mengqi got home, especially since her phone keys were left behind. Mengqi didn't drive the car. Detectives had suspicions, but they found no evidence to prove Joe was involved in his wife's disappearance. No blood, weapons, witnesses, or body. Furthermore, there was no indication that Mengqi ran away to meet another man in China. They also confirmed that Mengqi had not booked any flights. From the start, it was clear that Mengqi would never have abandoned her beloved daughter. Mengqi's parents refused to accept this hypothesis and insisted that she was a loving mother. When detectives spoke with Joe, they asked for his phone number, which he willingly provided. Inside his phone, investigators discovered something alarming: over 10 hours of secretly recorded conversations with his wife, in which Joe expressed his dissatisfaction with their marriage and his desire for a divorce. He also discussed plans to send his wife back to China. However, this discovery was minor compared to the nearly 4.5 hours of recordings found on Mengqi's phone. In these conversations, the true nature of Joe emerged. He threatened his wife, referred to himself as God, and demanded that her parents stay away from their home. It was chilling. The Joe family's issues started a few weeks before Mengqi gave birth. Her parents traveled from China to support their daughter, following a tradition where grandparents help with the baby for 100 days. This custom bothered Joe immensely, as he had a strong dislike for Mengqi's parents. What really angered Joe was that Mengqi tried to fight him back, and she said that she needed her parents. She loved them very much and needed their help taking care of the newborn. When Mengqi had just given birth, the relationship between her and her husband became very tense, and they argued a lot. Mengqi's mother mentioned that Joe disliked it when Mengqi spoke Chinese around him because he barely understood the language. Joe interpreted everything they said as hurtful and negative towards him. Eventually, when Mengqi's father could no longer tolerate the situation and returned to China, Joe felt relieved and seeing it as his personal victory. Now, he only had to manage his mother-in-law and reassert his authority in the home. Mengqi's mother made Chinese dumplings for Joe's birthday, but he didn't like the way she used the cutting board. This sparked a heated argument between Joe and her. Joe angrily demanded that she leave his house for good. Mengqi's mother, who believed in maintaining harmony because of her Confucian values, chose not to confront Joe and did not defend herself against his harsh words. Mengqi pleaded with Joe to allow her mother to stay because she needed her mother's support, but Joe only replied with insults and foul language. Joe told Mengqi was incompetent solely because she was a woman. Joe attempted to manipulate and control her. He even threatened Mengqi's mother, claiming he would harm her. This left Mengqi's mother in shock. She didn't understand why Joe was so angry with both her and Mengqi. Feeling helpless, Mengqi sought help from Joe's mother, who quickly lost her temper and drove 2 hours to address the family conflict. However, even with his mother present, Joe couldn't hide his disdain for his mother-in-law. He demanded that she kneel and bow to him. Although Joe eventually apologized to her, he still insisted that she leave before the 100-day mark. Consequently, Mengqi's mother returned to China. In October 2019, Mengqi disappeared. Detectives believed that serious family conflicts made her feel trapped, especially regarding her immigration status. Just 5 months prior, she had to attend another interview to apply for citizenship. 2 weeks after Minchi's disappearance, the Columbia Police Department opened a criminal investigation into the case. On the same day, 16 days after she went missing, police arrested Joe Elledge on suspicion of child abuse. Joe confessed to physically abusing his 1-year-old daughter, claiming it was a form of discipline. Before Minchi went missing, she told her mother that she had seen bruises on her daughter and suspected Joe was the cause. Her mother advised her to report Joe to the police, but Minchi never had the opportunity to do so. Joe's lawyer claimed this was merely an attempt to get Joe imprisoned. He argued that Joe made a mistake, emphasizing that he is a young single father who might have erred. Joe was released on bail, while his mother assisted him and cared for her granddaughter. Meanwhile, detectives continued to gather evidence against Joe, convinced that he was involved in Minchi's disappearance. On October 25, 2019, police obtained a search warrant and entered the apartment. Joe had been missing for just over 2 weeks. During the search, they collected Minchi's backpack and notes that Joe had written to help himself prepare for questions from reporters and investigators. Detectives thoroughly searched the apartment for any evidence and, following a hunch, they also took a pair of dirty boots for examination, but they found nothing significant. On the same day, Joe Elledge was arrested on suspicion of child abuse after fresh bruises were discovered on the girl's body. Meanwhile, the search for Minchi has become a search for her remains, because no one believes she is still alive. Detectives carefully tracked all movements of Joe's car and phone. However, every lead they followed led to dead ends in this complex case. As a result, the detective made the decision to charge Joe Elledge with first-degree murder, even without a body. These charges were filed while Joe was still in jail on child abuse allegations. Meanwhile, detectives continued their efforts to locate Minchi. Phone records indicated that Joe was away for 30 minutes on the day he reported her missing, a fact he did not share with investigators. When the detectives searched that location, they found nothing. After months of searching, the police were still unable to find Minchi. Her mother traveled to the United States to help with the search, convinced that her daughter's body was nearby. Over the following months, the police conducted regular searches in the area, and Minchi's mother held a memorial by the river. A year later, while Joe was still awaiting his trial, a tourist was walking in the park where Joe had proposed to Minchi. He noticed something shiny in the mud and discovered it was a wallet. Upon closer inspection, he saw a pair of shoes and then what looked like a human skull. He immediately contacted the police. Upon investigation, it was confirmed that the remains were those of Minchi. Her parents learned that their daughter had died, but the circumstances surrounding her death were still unclear. Much time had passed, and even forensic experts could not determine the cause of death. They found unnatural damage to her bones, including 4 broken ribs, indicating she had suffered a strong blow to the back. Detectives began to piece together a theory about what happened to Minchi, focusing on the evidence collected after her disappearance. They noted that Joe's cell phone records indicated he was near the location where Minchi was found on the day he reported her missing. On the day Minchi disappeared, it had been raining. Key evidence included Joe's dirty boots. The dirt and gravel on the soles, along with foliage, were sent to the Missouri Botanical Garden for analysis. The lab carefully removed juniper tree needles from the boots for DNA testing. A lab worker then climbed nearby juniper trees, numbered each, and collected fresh needles from the highest branches. These samples were preserved and compared with the needles found on Joe's shoes, revealing a DNA match. On November 1, 2021, Joe Elledge's trial for the murder of his wife, Minchi, began. With compelling evidence that Joe was present at the scene where Minchi's body was discovered on the day she went missing, including DNA from the trees and geolocation data. However, his lawyer presented a new narrative. The lawyer claimed that Joe did kill his wife, but insisted it was a tragic accident. Due to evidence from the juniper tree and its DNA, Joe could no longer assert that Mingqi had run away. He had to confess that he buried her in a shallow grave. Joe stated that he was aware of his wife's communication with a man from China, and they had an argument that night. Feeling upset and hurt, he wanted to take their daughter for a walk. Mingqi rushed towards him, intending to take the child, but Joe pushed her away. She fell against the table, injured her ribs, and lost consciousness. When she regained consciousness, she went to bed. In the morning, when the child started crying, Mingqi did not wake up. Joe then realized she had passed away in her sleep. He claimed that his wife had attacked him first and that he was only defending himself, asserting it was self-defense. However, this explanation seemed highly questionable. Joe was twice the size of his wife, making it unlikely that she could have attacked him, and after sustaining such a severe injury, she would not have been able to get up and walk to the bed. The prosecutor argued that the evidence, particularly the 4 broken ribs, suggested Joe's account was fabricated. This injury indicated she had suffered a brutal beating. The prosecutor alleged that it was premeditated murder driven by months of escalating anger. Joe harbored hatred for his wife. In court, the prosecutor presented secret audio recordings between the couple to reveal the true dynamics of their relationship. These recordings helped clarify the motive behind the crime. No evidence of Mingqi communicating with other men was ever found. On November 11, 2021, after nearly 7 hours of discussion, the jury reached a verdict. They found Joe alleged guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 28 years in prison. Mingqi and Joe's daughter currently lives with Joe's mother, but Mingqi's parents are pursuing joint custody of their 4-year-old granddaughter. Joe's lawyer argues that while the child will always have a relationship with her Chinese grandparents, she should stay in the care of Joe's mother for her safety. The case of Sandra Miles. Sandra was born on May 26, 1949, in the small, cozy town of Harn, Kansas, USA. She had a close relationship with her sister. They attended the same school, walked together, and spent time with their family. After graduating from high school, Sandra focused on starting a family. She was in a serious relationship with her boyfriend, and they decided to get married. They welcomed a son named Chad. Unfortunately, the marriage did not work out. Sandra quickly realized that her husband was not the right match for her. After the divorce, Sandra found another partner, but that relationship also ended in disappointment, leading her to break up with him as well. In 1976, Sandra, a single mother, got a job at a factory that made pumps and pistons for industrial machinery. This job required her family to relocate to a larger city, Hutchinson. In her new position, Sandra proved herself and gained the respect of management through her hard work and responsibility. She performed her tasks exceptionally well. It was during this time that she met her third husband, Jerry Miles. They were instantly attracted to each other, and their friendship quickly blossomed into romance, leading to their decision to marry. Their marriage happened rapidly, but it was evident that Jerry and Sandra truly loved each other and were eager to get married. A year later, Sandra was expecting a baby with her new husband. In September of that year, they welcomed their daughter, Tracy, who brought immense joy to her parents, especially Sandra, who had always dreamed of having a large family. During this time, their marriage appeared to be perfect. The couple had a strong bond and prioritized their family above all else. Jerry's children regularly communicated with him and participated in family events. He particularly enjoyed spending time with Tracy at the nearby lake. To outsiders, their marriage appeared perfect. However, only close friends and family knew of the underlying issue. After 7 years of marriage, Sandra could no longer endure her husband's alcoholism. This revelation shocked many, as she had previously concealed the problem. Sandra ultimately chose to end her marriage to her third husband, Jerry, and raise their children by herself. She thought Jerry was a kind man when he was sober, but he had difficulty managing his drinking. When he drank, he became a completely different person. At first, he was able to control his drinking, but over time, his alcoholism became more and more evident. His relapses became more frequent, placing a heavy burden on Sandra. She worked every day at the factory to support the family and eventually became exhausted from the thing. Sandra always saw Jerry as a wonderful husband and father. Their relationship ended because he struggled with alcohol addiction. Even so, she continued to support their children while maintaining her job. This was a challenging time for her, but she was determined not to give up and managed to handle the difficulties well. Jerry offered some help, but when he succumbed to alcohol again, Sandra had to face all the challenges alone. Despite this, she stayed confident in her abilities and was driven to ensure her children had a bright future and everything they needed for a fulfilling life. It was certainly challenging, but Sandra Miles was not one to give up easily. She remained a conscientious mother, spending all her free time with her children. Despite facing difficulties, she handled them with grace, which brought her closer to her daughter Tracy during this time. Her son had grown up, moved out, and started his own life, but Tracy continues to support her mother because she realizes that Sandra's efforts are mainly to benefit her. In the spring of 1997, Sandra's relationship with Tracy, her 16-year-old daughter, began to deteriorate. Tracy has started dating her first boyfriend and is going through the rebellious phase that is common in adolescence. Sandra tried to improve their relationship. She thought her daughter's problems were only temporary. At the same time, Sandra was mindful of her own past failed marriages and felt the need to caution Tracy about the mistakes she made in her youth. Tracy's affection for her mother faded quickly, leading to a strained relationship between them. To win her daughter's love, Sandra bought Tracy a Black Moon car, which Tracy had longed for. This gift excited Tracy. She adored her car and made a point to arrive first at school every day so everyone would notice it. It seemed like Tracy had a bright future ahead, and she represented hope for Sandra. Sandra was determined to do whatever it took to help her daughter succeed. However, fate can be cruel. On March 20th, Sandra's son Chad and his girlfriend Mindy visited her with exciting news. Mindy was pregnant. Sandra was thrilled at the prospect of becoming a grandmother and eagerly anticipated the birth of her grandson. Unfortunately, Sandra would not live to see that moment. While Sandra's sister, Pat Douglas Butler, was having breakfast with her husband, she received an urgent call from Sandra's workplace. Sandra's employer reported that Sandra had been absent for 5 days. Concerned for her well-being, the boss tried to contact her but was unable to reach her. Pat also hadn't heard from her during this time, as they didn't typically call each other every day. Worried, Pat and her husband decided to visit Sandra's house to check if she was okay or if she needed help. When Pat and her husband arrived, they found the door locked and the house appeared deserted. This was strange because Sandra lived there with her daughter, Tracy, who was usually very active and should have been home at that time. Then, Pat and her husband went to the school to look for Tracy. The teachers were confused as Tracy had also been absent for several days. The class teacher, Noni, tried to call the family, but no one answered. Alarmed by the situation, Pat decided to call the police to report the disappearance of both Sandra and Tracy. The officers took Pat's statement and assessed the situation. When they arrived, Pat was waiting for them and handed over a spare key to the front door that she had kept. Law enforcement officers entered the house and immediately detected a strong, unpleasant smell of decomposition, unmistakable in nature. The experienced patrol officers recognized the importance of preserving the crime scene to protect the evidence, so they called for backup. When additional police officers arrived, they discovered the decomposed body of a woman lying on her bed, covered with a blanket. Upon removing the blanket, they found a power cord from a household appliance wrapped around her neck, indicating she likely died from strangulation. Additionally, there were multiple injuries visible on her face and head. Due to the severe level of decomposition, the victim's identity could not be immediately determined. It was unclear how many blows she had suffered or what exactly was hit with, but it was clear that her death was not natural, it was a murder. A forensic medical examination was needed to understand the details surrounding her death. However, dental records confirmed that the body belonged to Sandra Miles. Besides, they could not find Tracy in the house, indicating that she was missing. At first, detectives thought Tracy might also be a victim of the same attacker. They searched the house thoroughly, but found no evidence suggesting she had been harmed like her mother. It was possible that Tracy had been kidnapped, placing her in great danger and requiring immediate action. She was added to the missing persons list, and the search for her began. It was unclear who would wish harm on Sandra, a woman who devoted her life to creating a future for her children. When Detective Hutchinson began investigating the case, they considered every possibility, including neighbors and her ex-husband. The aim was to uncover who had a motive for the murder of 48-year-old Sandra Miles and the disappearance of Tracy. Sandra's family, sister, son, and ex-husband were quickly informed of the tragic news. All were in shock. Sandra seemed to have no enemies and was known as a kind and gentle person who worked hard to overcome life's difficulty and support her daughter. It was hard to believe anyone could be so cruel to someone defenseless. Tracy's brother, Chad, made an appeal through the newspaper, asking locals to help find Tracy, his only surviving family member who had been taken from him. Forensic experts have revealed harrowing details of Sandra's last moments. Sandra had been knocked to the ground by repeated blows to her head with a blunt object. While she was incapacitated, a power cord was used to strangle her. The presence of large bruises and internal bleeding indicated she endured a prolonged and violent assault. The medical examiner believed there were likely at least 2 attackers. Investigators suggested that the incident was a robbery gone wrong, possibly triggered when Sandra confronted the intruders as they attempted to steal from her home. Sandra might have seen them, then a fight broke out, and they murdered her because they were afraid she would report to the police. However, after inspecting the crime scene, detectives found this scenario unlikely. There were no signs of a break-in, and the house lost nothing, except Tracy's favorite car. It didn't make sense to commit murder for the sake of theft. The brutality of Sandra's injuries was notable. An ordinary robber wouldn't have wasted time with strangulation. They would have shot her to avoid confrontation. The severe damage to her upper body indicated that the injuries were not a result of panic from being caught, but rather a deliberate attack meant to kill. This level of cruelty suggested a culmination of a long-standing feud. Another possibility considered was that of a maniacal attacker, but generally, such individuals act alone. This crime, however, was clearly carried out by multiple people given the severity of the injuries. Now, the killers had taken Tracy captive, making it urgent to locate the criminals. The detectives believed that Sandra had willingly let her attackers into the house, as there were no signs of forced entry. Therefore, they recognized the need to continue the investigation. The police contacted all of Sandra's relatives, friends, neighbors, and co-workers as part of their investigation. The police focused particularly on her ex-husbands, as they might have motives rooted in resentment. Sandra's third husband, Jerry, who struggled with alcoholism, drew significant attention. He may have been unhappy after the divorce, and the detective speculated that he could have confronted Sandra while intoxicated, possibly leading to her death. However, the detectives to find that he had an alibi, so he was removed from the list of suspects. police interviewed all of Sandra's acquaintances to identify suspects in the violent massacre and possibly Tracy's kidnapping. Sandra's sister, Pat, informed detectives that she last saw Sandra alive 5 days earlier. On that day, she received a work call around the same time Tracy visited the school where she studied, making it a key date in the investigation. Efforts to gather information from friends and acquaintances were unproductive. So detectives turned to the neighbors. They discovered that the neighborhood was peaceful and close-knit, where everyone was familiar with one another. The next day, news of the incident at Sandra's house spread quickly. A crowd gathered in the yard and driveway, prompting the police to restrict access to the area. Many neighbors stopped by out of curiosity, anxious to learn what had happened. There was a growing concern in everyone, as they realized a dangerous killer, and possibly a kidnapper, was still at large, especially since there had been no word from Tracy. Fortunately, some witnesses in the crowd provided valuable information to the detectives. A neighbor who lived directly across the street reported seeing Tracy about 5 days earlier, on March 25th. He had noticed her with 2 young men. They all got into one of the guy's cars and drove away, and he never saw them again. This account raised questions about the nature of Tracy's disappearance, as it didn't fit the typical scenario of a schoolgirl being kidnapped. The friends, identified as Mark and Jay, lived nearby, so the detectives decided to interview them at their homes. Mark quickly left as several police officers spotted a red car in the distance. When Mark noticed the police approaching, he sped away and vanished at high speed. This behavior seemed suspicious, so one of the detectives alerted the patrol nearby about his direction. Mark wouldn't have fled so rapidly if he weren't trying to hide something from the police. Luckily, it didn't take long for them to catch up. Mark was eventually stopped just a few kilometers from his home. Mark was driving his car with a friend who was anxious about the recent tragedy at Sandra's house. The 2 young men attempted to convince the police that their fear was the only reason for their unusual behavior, but seasoned detectives sensed they were hiding something. Consequently, both were taken to the police station for questioning. During the interrogation, the young men insisted they were merely frightened by the news of the incident at the Miles residence. Their stories closely matched, but the police found no solid evidence against them, so they were released. However, they became important witnesses because the police were aware that Tracy had recently been in a relationship with a young man named Jeremy Bell. They also knew that Sandra disapproved of him, believing he would have a negative impact on her daughter's life. Eventually, Tracy broke up with Jeremy and started dating Paul Nelson. Several witnesses stated that shortly before the tragedy, Tracy had a significant argument with her mother over Jeremy and Paul, both of whom Sandra disapproved. Detectives began interviewing numerous teenagers connected to this group. It was established that Tracy's ex, Jeremy, had a volatile temperament and had even made threats against Paul. However, Paul was not the main reason for Tracy and Jeremy's breakup. That was largely due to Sandra's disapproval, which may have prompted Jeremy's hostility toward her. In fact, the relationship between Sandra and Jeremy was extremely strained. Sandra had to go to the police station to obtain a restraining order against Jeremy. He accused her of ruining his relationship with her daughter, Tracy, and threatened her, although he never acted on these threats. During drunken parties, he often expressed how much Sandra bothered him to his friends. Sandra was determined to protect her daughter from him, which only led to more conflicts. It was known that Jeremy was already on the police's radar due to his numerous violations, and the restraining order worsened the situation. He clearly held a grudge against Sandra, which raised concerns that he could have kidnapped Tracy. At this point, detectives believed that Jeremy had killed Sandra and was now holding Tracy captive. They decided to question Jeremy, who, along with his friend William Lennon, had been arrested for burglary on the 1st of the month, just a few days before Sandra's murder. Since Jeremy was in prison during the time of the murder, he could not have been involved in Sandra's death. The fate of Tracy remained uncertain. The kidnapper had not made any demands, leading the police to fear that she might already be dead, although there was still a chance she was being held hostage. Time was of the essence for her safety. When investigators spoke with Jeremy in prison, he explained that he was not in a relationship with Tracy at the time of Sandra's murder due to a restraining order that required him to avoid contact with her. As a result, they broke up. During this time, Tracy began dating another man, Paul Nelson, which led Jeremy to distance himself from her. The police noticed that Jeremy appeared to strongly dislike Paul and openly expressed a desire to confront. Jeremy accused Paul of encouraging Tracy to engage in criminal behavior and worried that she might become involved with drugs because of her relationship with him. However, he stated that he did not harbor any ill feelings toward Sandra. In fact, their communication improved once Tracy started dating Paul. As Sandra shifted her anger towards Paul, Jeremy supported Sandra during this time. On March 25th, just before Sandra's murder, Jeremy warned Tracy about her new boyfriend, Paul, whom he considered dangerous. By that time, the autopsy results were complete. The medical examiner determined that Sandra died on March 26th from 4 stab wounds and significant blunt force trauma to the head. These injuries were confirmed as the cause of death, and strangulation was also used to ensure she was dead. The police needed to locate Paul Nelson, the main suspect, to question him. However, he was missing. His parents reported that he hadn't been seen since March 26th. Like Tracy, detectives believed he was involved in Sandra's murder. They needed to find him and uncover what happened to Tracy, but they could only address that after detaining him. Investigators discovered that Paul had been in regular contact with his friend Zwickle, with whom he had lived before going into hiding. When detectives spoke with Zwickle, he provided valuable information. He confirmed that Sandra did not approve of the relationship between Tracy and Paul. Sandra believed that Paul, Tracy's new boyfriend, was a bad influence and was trying to get her involved with drugs. Despite Sandra's objections, Tracy and Paul continued to meet secretly. After several weeks, Sandra found out about it and was upset. She told her daughter that getting involved with a drug addict was a big mistake. Despite this, she refused to face the truth. Her mother urged her to end the relationship with Paul. Sandra then informed Tracy that if she wanted a family and children, she would need to move in with Paul. This news surprised both Tracy and Paul, as they had nowhere to live. Sandra advised Tracy to think about ending her pregnancy, and Tracy consented. However, their relationship worsened after the abortion. A shocking moment for Tracy was when Sandra threatened to take her car keys if she didn't end her relationship with Paul. This tension may have led Paul to develop a grudge against Sandra, who he and Tracy saw as an obstacle to their relationship. Paul's friend, Zwickle, reported that on March 26th, Paul returned home around 10 a.m. and immediately began packing his belongings. Paul mentioned that he was planning to leave with Tracy and that they had $2,000, which he believed would be sufficient for their escape. Paul confided in Zwickle that he and Tracy intended to run away in her car, and Zwickle assumed they were fleeing due to a disagreement. However, Paul did not mention Sandra's death to Zwickle. When Zwickle inquired about how Paul obtained the money, he claimed he had sold Sandra's tape recorder to a pawn shop. It was later discovered that tape recorder had indeed gone missing from the house after the attack. In reality, Paul was not being truthful. Selling tape recorder only netted him less than $50. It remained unclear how Paul could have acquired such a significant amount of money at that time. Afterwards, Zwickle noticed how Paul and Tracy got into a car and drove away without any signs of stress. It seemed they were heading to Mexico. Given the situation, Zwickle began to suspect that Paul might be involved in a murder. As a result, Paul and Tracy were placed on a nationwide wanted list. Investigators in Kansas identified 18-year-old Paul Nelson as the prime suspect. The police were particularly troubled by the $2,000 Paul had, which he used to flee. They wondered if he had robbed someone or committed another crime. Investigators were shocked and they examined Sandra's bank accounts. On March 26th, her daughter, Tracy, withdrew money from her mother's account. While looking into this, detectives discovered that Tracy had gone to the bank with Paul and cashed a check with the teller. Tracy claimed that her mother had given her the money to buy a new car. This raised serious suspicions about her actions. A bank employee reported that Tracy and Paul were calm during the transaction and showed no signs of worry. Amid suspicions that Tracy may have been a hostage in a kidnapping, police now have new suspicions. It seemed Paul's friend, Zwickle, was telling the truth. Could Tracy actually be a willing participant in the crime instead of a hostage? To investigate further, they reached out to Tracy's best friend, Candace Keno. Candace revealed that on March 25th, Tracy had called her to share that a serious conflict had erupted with her mother. Tracy's mother had taken the car key away from her and threatened to kick her out. This created evident hostility between them. Candace mentioned that following this incident, Tracy decided to run away with Paul and admitted this during their phone conversation. The officers' doubts were confirmed. It became clear that from the very beginning, no one had actually tried to keep Tracy as a hostage. The police confirmed that Tracy and Paul had crossed the border into Mexico and subsequently got lost. After some time, a United States Border Service officer informed the police that Tracy and Paul had re-entered the U.S. near El Paso. The reason for their return was unclear, but it was evident that they were in trouble. Efforts to locate the couple intensified. On April 8th, Candace contacted investigators to report that she had spoken with Tracy on the phone. Candace provided the police with Tracy's phone number. Tracy and Paul was located on the outskirts of El Paso, and later, that day, investigators apprehended Paul. Candace agreed to make another call to help detectives pinpoint the location from which Tracy had called. Tracy and Paul was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. Paul did not appear to be a dangerous gangster. He kept his eyes on the floor and trembled with fear. He explained the details of the attack, admitting that on the evening of the 25th, he had gone to the house Sandra's. Then, Tracy and Paul had devised an escape plan, and it was Tracy who proposed drastic measures. She wanted to kill her mother to prevent her from ever finding her. The next morning, Candace stopped by to pick up Tracy, and they left for school together. Meanwhile, Paul was hiding in the bedroom with a tree branch he intended to use as a weapon. He claimed he found it in the house and did not plan to kill Sandra. He only wanted to strike her so she would lose consciousness. However, the police were skeptical of his explanation. They questioned why he would sneak into the house and attack her if he didn't intend to kill her, knowing she could eventually regain consciousness and report him. It seemed clear to the investigators that his intention was murder, which would allow him to escape without being caught. Paul continued his story. He claimed that Sandra surprised him by opening the door and immediately began yelling and insulting him. In a fit of anger, he wrapped a cord around Sandra's neck and strangled her until she stopped breathing. Afterward, he covered she with a blanket and fled the scene. Meanwhile, Tracy, smiling, testified in the next room. Their accounts were similar, except for how much blame they placed on each other. Tracy asserted that she did not act alone. She claimed that she and Paul planned the murder together, but only Paul killed her mother. Tracy insisted that she had no role in the crime. She also revealed that the wooden figurine used in the murder was hidden in the backyard. The police later found the figurine there, along with Sandra's blood on it. The prosecutor's office was prepared to charge Tracy and Paul with first-degree murder. According to state law, the maximum penalty for this crime was life imprisonment. Paul's defense argued that he acted under Tracy's influence, claiming he should be guilty of manslaughter instead. Conversely, Tracy's lawyer argued that Paul was the instigator, as he was the one who strangled Sandra, while Tracy played a secondary role. The trial began on February 26, 1999, with both defense teams trying to downplay their clients' involvement in the horrific crime to lessen their possible sentences. During the trial, the young defendants, Tracy and Paul, displayed disrespectful behavior and laughed provocatively. Tracy refused to meet with her family, even though they wanted to discuss her involvement in Sandra's murder. Her brother, Chad, particularly wished to speak with her. On April 22, 1999, the court sentenced Tracy Miles and Paul Nelson to life in prison, with a minimum of 25 years before they can apply for parole. After the judge announced the sentence, Paul made an obscene gesture. Both Tracy and Paul expressed dissatisfaction with the verdict and showed no signs of remorse for their actions. In the future, Tracy and Paul will have the chance to request early release, but Sandra's relatives hope that this does not occur. The case of Melania Ray. This is the story of Melania Ray, a striking woman who was a drill instructor in the Ken Regiment at the time of the incident. She was married to Salvatore Peralisi and they had a one-year-old daughter, Vittoria. The family lived in a small village called Oscolaquina, near the San Marco Plateau in Italy. At this time, tourists walking along the paths below the mountainside could not see the flowers that usually bloom on the plateau because the snow had only recently melted. However, a bar and small shops were open, allowing visitors to stroll and enjoy the view. The tragedy occurred on Monday, April 18, 2011, around 3 p.m. On that day, Salvatore arrived in the area with his young daughter after parking his car nearby. He entered a small bar, used the restroom, and then asked the locals if they had seen his wife, Melania. She had recently given birth and had gone missing. At the time, she was 28 years old, athletic, and had long dark hair. When Salvatore learned that no one had seen Melania, he became more anxious, pacing back and forth. He eventually broke down in tears, expressing his fear that his wife had been kidnapped. The people there decided to support him and his daughter by helping to search for Melania. They went out onto the porch and walked along the path from the parking lot to the bar, hoping to find any sign of her, but they found nothing. The Salvatore explained that earlier that morning, he had been with his wife. After lunch, they went to the plateau, where he played with his daughter near the swings in the playground. His wife had planned to step away briefly to buy coffee and use the restroom, but she did not return. Sensing that something was wrong, he began calling her numerous times over the past 15 minutes, but she didn't answer. He realized her phone was missing and suspected that she might have been kidnapped by people in a passing car. The Salvatore remained at the bar and spoke with the owner, Giovanna, but the longer he stayed, the more unusual his behavior seemed. First, Salvatore was inadequately dressed for a cool spring day. Second, he seemed to neglect his one-year-old daughter while he grieved for his missing wife. The little girl wandered through the bar, grew hungry, and felt cold, but her father paid no attention to her needs, continuing to cry and recount his story about his wife's disappearance. At 4:34 p.m., a call came into the local police station from Giovanna, the owner of a bar. She called the emergency services because Salvatore had just left, reporting that he had not been able to find his wife for over an hour and was concerned that she might have been kidnapped. He had his young daughter, just over a year old, with him, and the father was clearly upset. When he returned to the bar, Giovanna handed him the phone to speak to the police. The shaky man gave the dispatcher some details about himself and his missing wife, Melania. He mentioned that she had a hernia, which may have worsened as they were near the mountains. He repeated the story he had shared with others, emphasizing that Melania had disappeared after going to the bar. Throughout the call, he spoke very softly, often mumbling and stuttering, and there were long pauses. Police had to ask nearly every question multiple times to get him to respond. When the police arrived, he repeated his story, explaining that Melania had health problems, so they were forced to go to the nearest hospital. They then decided to stop for a walk and coffee. While she was out, Salvatore stayed at the playground with their daughter, who was playing on the swings. When Melania did not return, he became concerned and tried calling her, but she did not answer. This was unusual, as she usually answered her calls. Worried about her silence, Salvatore eventually went to the bar where she was supposed to be and began asking people there if they had seen her. As time passed without any news, Salvatore grew increasingly desperate. The police asked him detailed questions about Melania's appearance and the moments leading up to her departure. Salvatore insisted that she was fine, she had just needed to use the restroom, and there was no sign of abnormal. At the scene, the police verified Salvatore's identity and began their investigation. They first conducted a quick analysis of his phone data, looking into his recent interests and searches to evaluate his credibility. The police learned about Salvatore Paralisi, born on August 28, 1987, in the province of Naples, Italy. At the time Melania went missing, he was with their daughter in Felina. His wife, Melania Ray, was born on May 24, 1982, in another small town in the province of Naples. Since both were military personnel, the Carabinieri promptly contacted their military unit for further information. To assist Salvatore, a friend of his who was also a police officer arrived at the scene. He wanted to help Salvatore take care of Vittoria. Eventually, the police were able to gather all the necessary information and then released Salvatore and his daughter. Melania's relatives were notified of the situation shortly after. They rushed to the scene to learn more about what had happened and assist in the search for Melania. During discussions with police, Salvatore acted unusually. As a military man, he knew it was important to provide accurate information to the police to help find his wife quickly. Instead, he dodged questions and slowed down the investigation. Police had to ask him for Melania's cell phone number 3 or 4 times before he shared the information. The police wanted to track Melania's mobile phone to locate her and track her movements. There were only 3 busy walkways between the bar and the playground. One was more than 100 meters long and was mostly visible from the kiosk cameras. The second was much longer and led to the War Memorial, a destination that often has a lot of people passing by. The third walkway, 150 meters long, was also closely monitored by cameras. Surprisingly, however, nothing was seen. The cameras did not record any footage of Melania, raising doubts about whether she had been in the area that day. Data shows that Melania's cell phone was last active at 2:45 p.m., just before she went missing. The activity was near the location where she had been staying with Salvatore and Vittoria. Unfortunately, this information did not lead to any further details. The only hope for the search lay with the National Mountain Rescue Service. Experts were called in to help, bringing equipment and sniffer dogs. Dogs' sense of smell is so acute that they can follow a scent for up to 20 days after being left behind. The dog quickly oriented itself and followed the asphalt road to the monument. At that point, the trail appeared to end, suggesting that Melania may have gotten into the car and driven away. However, Salvatore later mentioned that they had been in the area just over a week ago. This leaves 2 possibilities. The dog was following Melania's old scent, or she had actually been abducted. Afterward, the police took Salvatore to the station for questioning. There, he recounted all the details of the day leading up to Melania's disappearance. According to him, she visited a physiotherapist around 11:30 a.m. They then went to a supermarket and later visited the San Marco Clinic, where doctors diagnosed her with an inguinal hernia. After lunch, they returned home to change clothes before going for a walk with their daughter. Salvatore noted that they had been in the area for the past month, making Melania very familiar with the territory. Salvatore mentioned that he and Melania had gone to a bar together during their visit. After gathering all the necessary information, the police sent Salvatore home. The main theory of the police was kidnapping, based on information gathered with the help of sniffer dogs. They believed that Melania had approached the road, was abducted, and her trail suddenly ended. All the evidence suggested that she may have been forced into the car. In May, Salvatore appeared on television to share his story, revealing new details. He mentioned that he and his wife had a small picnic near the war memorial and were relaxing there on the day she disappeared. Salvatore also described the clothes and accessories Melania was wearing when she went missing. Interestingly, he noted that she did not have her handbag with her personal belongings at that time. She was wearing casual clothes and several gold ornaments. However, it was puzzling how a responsible woman could embark on a long trip with a child without any preparation or a handbag. She didn't even have money or cigarettes, which she usually smoked. Melania also forgot to bring a milk bottle and clothes for her daughter. Another point of confusion was how she could have gone to the bar to buy her husband coffee if she had no money. Salvatore's statements became increasingly contradictory, leading to suspicions that he might be lying. With these concerns in mind, the police decided to question Salvatore again to learn more. Salvatore claimed that they had a strong relationship and that they sometimes disagreed on various issues. But these disagreements never escalated into conflict. In general, they had a great, strong family, which was confirmed by relatives and friends. Therefore, the Salvatore was released. The next day, Melania's relatives arrived in town and stayed at a small apartment near the Salvatore home. Although exhausted from the trip, they made it a priority to visit the police station to ask about the investigation. They provided any information that could help locate Melania as quickly as possible. It was discovered that Melania had two phones that Salvatore did not mention. One phone was used to contact her husband and friends. The other phone was used to talk to her mother and close relatives. At 1:34 p.m. on the day Melania went missing, her mother-in-law called the second number. They had a conversation that lasted about 9 minutes, during which Melania shared details about the day. She mentioned that her family was going to San Marco to go for a walk and attend the christening of a friend's child at around 4 p.m. The call ended at 1:43 p.m., and there was no further communication. The police got no new information out of Salvatore. His testimony was largely a rehash of what they already knew. The police were puzzled by his decision to stay with the child. They questioned why Melania didn't bring Vittoria along when she went out for coffee. The trip from their house to the park took less than 20 minutes. Did Melania really need to go to the bathroom during that time? And most importantly, where did the girl go afterward? Melania's relatives moved into the Salvatore home and spoke to him regularly about the situation, but he remained quiet and sad, often avoiding their questions. Salvatore's relatives tried to support him as much as possible, helping him care for Vittoria. On April 19, 2011, the entire city learned of Melania's disappearance. This was shocking, as the suburb was known to be one of the quietest and most peaceful areas in the area. Although the police suspected Salvatore, he had no previous legal problems. Salvatore frequently appeared on various television shows, discussing the tragedy he was facing. To clarify what had happened that morning, police checked Salvatore's cell phone. They found that it had been on from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. but then turned off until 6 p.m. That same day, Salvatore drove to Plateau San Mar, where the armed forces, police, and search teams were working. However, he showed little interest in the search efforts or their progress. Instead, he returned the sweatshirt he had borrowed from Giovanna, a bar owner, on the day Melania went missing and quickly left, claiming that he had to go to work. His behavior aroused suspicion among the police. While examining Salvatore's mobile phone, the carabinieri found something noteworthy. He had been in constant communication with a girl named Ludovica for the past month, exchanging thousands of messages and making calls almost every day. It became clear that he was having a romantic affair with her. Salvatore had fallen in love with Ludovica Pero in September 2009. And their relationship continued even at home in 2011, after Melania went missing. In the summer of 2009, Melania discovered his infidelity and was furious. At the time, she moved in with her parents and she was pregnant with their daughter. Despite this, Salvatore continued to pursue Ludovica, who was 27 at the time and working in their military unit. Eventually, for the sake of their child, Salvatore and Melania reconciled, and she returned home. However, his love affair continued. He often rented an apartment to see Ludovica. After completing her training, Ludovica was sent to Rome, but their relationship continued. Salvatore spent most of his free time talking to her on the phone. Their conversations showed that Ludovica wanted more than a long-distance relationship, but Melania's presence got in the way. In the months leading up to Melania's disappearance, there had been tension between Ludovica and Salvatore. Ludovica wanted him to be with her, and he kept delaying their time together. Melania was determined to keep their marriage intact, especially after discovering that her husband was still seeing Ludovica. She even threatened to expose his relationship with his mistress, which could have jeopardized Salvatore's job. This threat scared him, causing him to distance himself from Ludovica. Melania believed that her tactics had worked, thinking that their relationship was back to normal and that Salvatore's feelings for Ludovica were just a passing love. Melania was determined not to give in. She wanted to resume their relationship, while Ludovica was urging him to leave his family for her. He found himself caught between two women. The situation escalated to the point where, on April 19th, Salvatore traveled to Rome to meet Ludovica's parents, hoping they could start a life together. The issue was that Melania was completely unaware of this plan. At the same time, he was supposed to be spending the holidays with his family, including Melania and their daughter. Just a day before this meeting. However, his wife went missing. This turn of events seemed very suspicious, as love triangles rarely have happy endings. When Salvatore returned to work after his wife went missing, management suggested a rescue operation. They suggested assembling a team of soldiers and using specialized equipment. However, Salvatore remained remarkably calm and insisted that such an operation was unnecessary. He believed that his wife had left him out of resentment, so no operations needed to be organized. Salvatore then deleted his social media accounts, which he had used to communicate with Ludovica. This led the police to discover a potential motive for the crime. By now, the crucial time to find the missing person alive had passed. The police took the situation seriously and concluded that they had no chance of finding Melania alive. The search dog used in the investigation did not detect new traces or scent of Melania. On April 23rd, police received a call from an unknown man who identified himself as a mushroom picker. He reported seeing the body of a woman 17 kilometers from Felina. Police arrived at the scene shortly after. The body was found to be Melania's. Forensic experts discovered multiple injuries on her body during the autopsy. These injuries were consistent with stab wounds caused by small knives, mainly to the head and neck. There were also injuries to her chest and some self-defense wounds. Although Melania was not raped, significant evidence was collected from the scene, including her cell phone, a bloody lighter, a water bottle, and traces of a small car. The most important piece of evidence was a grocery store receipt from the morning of April 18th. Additionally, insulin syringes were found nearby, suggesting that Melania may have been abusing drugs. However, a toxicology report confirmed that there were no traces of alcohol or illegal drugs in Melania's system. the police received information from Salvatore about an interesting coincidence. A few days before Melania went missing, she and her husband had an intimate encounter in the same area behind the kiosk where her body was later discovered. Somehow, this information reached Ludovica, who was furious, having been lied to. He had repeatedly assured Ludovica that he was no longer intimate with his wife. This revelation only added to the complexity surrounding their relationship. However, on the day of their encounter, it was snowing and very cold, making it unlikely that they would engage in intimate relations outdoors. Additionally, it was known that Melania was experiencing pain from an inguinal hernia at that time. Given these factors, the narrative of a passionate encounter at the kiosk doesn't seem reasonable. However, this is just an assumption that needs to be proven. The police conducted a thorough search of the surrounding area for any traces of blood. They discovered various pieces of evidence, including shoe prints. In order to gather more information about the suspect, it was important to determine who was in the area at the time of the victim's death. During that time, soldiers from Salvatore's and Melania's regiments were present. In fact, the soldiers accidentally left behind some evidence, such as a water bottle, a store receipt, and shoe prints. This complicating factor hindered the police investigation because much of this evidence was irrelevant to the case. Additionally, the soldiers reported that they did not see anyone suspicious that day and confirmed that no body was present. The police decided to examine Ludovica more closely. They discovered that she did not leave the barracks on April 18th to 19th, providing her with a solid alibi for the time of the crime. Ludovica also shared crucial information, stating that on April 17th, she had spoken with Salvatore about their relationship. During this conversation, Salvatore mentioned that his wife was cheating on him. It was revealed that Ludovica was not Salvatore's only affair. He had previous relationships with other soldiers and women. Although Ludovica was aware of this, she did not consider it significant. Ultimately, it was uncovered that the Salvatore had been involved with several women simultaneously. Salvatore was aware that the police had obtained this information and feared it could be seen as a motive for the murder of Melania. To gather evidence against Salvatore, police installed a wiretap in his car and also eavesdropped on his telephone conversations. This yielded crucial information. Salvatore often talked to himself in the car about his wife's murder, raising suspicions of his involvement in Melania's death. Police obtained permission to search Salvatore's car with luminol, discovering traces of blood inside. Samples were sent to a lab, and subsequent testing confirmed the blood belonged to Melania. Meanwhile, the prosecutor's office was developing its theory to understand the motive behind the crime. They believed that Melania was a controlling person who harbored deep resentment towards her husband for his many betrayals, yet she kept him around for the sake of their child. This constant pressure worsened their situation. He sought an escape by starting a relationship with Ludovica, who also exerted pressure on him. In this relationship, he felt like a third wheel, leading him to consider getting rid of his difficult wife. Forensic experts have submitted their full report, confirming the findings of the medical examiner. They determined that Melania died between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. on April 18th from 35 stab wounds. It is likely that the attack occurred while she was urinating, as evidenced by her squatting position and an empty bladder. The attacker probably approached her from behind and struck when she least expected it, leaving little chance for her to defend herself. The nature of the wounds indicated that the assault was particularly brutal, stemming from personal animosity. It was confirmed that Melania never reached the plateau on the day she died, based on geolocation data from her mobile phone. The prosecutor's office believed they stopped near the kiosks in the pine forest, where they allegedly engaged in sexual intercourse. This occurred around 2:30 p.m., and it was at this point that Salvatore unexpectedly attacked and killed Melania. Afterwards, he returned home, changed his clothes, took their young daughter, and went straight to San Marco, where he entered a bar and pretended to be a heartbroken husband whose wife had left him. Despite his claims of innocence, the jury found the evidence against him compelling. As a result, Salvatore Paralisi was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison. He was also ordered to pay €2 million to Melania's family. Salvatore maintains his innocence and is currently serving his sentence in a reformatory in Milan. Custody of Melania's daughter was given to her family. Now 13, Vittoria has expressed her desire to change her last name to her mother's. She does not visit her father and would rather he not know about her choices. The case of Brianna Nugent. Brianna grew up in Hayden, Alabama, USA. Her friendly personality helped her make many friends. She doesn't care about boys at school. Instead, she devotes herself to her studies with the goal of becoming a nurse. After graduating high school, she enrolled in a nursing program at Wallace Community College. There, she met Stephen Nix, who was known to enjoy drinking and gambling. He was not concerned about having a stable job and often acted irresponsibly. Stephen worked as a cleaner at the medical center where Brianna was interning, and he seemed uninterested in improving his life. Despite their differences, they began dating, and at one point, Brianna moved into his house, where he lived with his parents. However, after a while, Stephen admitted to Brianna that he was having an affair with a coworker. This revelation shocked Brianna, leading her to end the relationship. She then focused on her studies and successfully earned her nursing degree. During the following year, Stephen repeatedly tried to reach out to her, pleading for another chance and promising he would never cheat again. Eventually, Brianna relented and agreed to give him another opportunity. They later got married and both started working to save money for their first home. The problem started when Stephen lost his job as a cleaner. He attempted to find another job but had difficulty maintaining any position for long. After several attempts, he eventually stopped looking for work altogether. His daily routine began to mirror that of a teenager. He spent his nights playing computer games and slept until the evening. Although Brianna had a good income, but Stephen, who was not contributing financially, took control of the family budget. Brianna had to ask him for every dollar she needed for basic necessities, often pleading with him for even essential items and food. However, Stephen didn't control his spending, so he ended up in debt of about $50,000. To address this issue, he persuaded Brianna to declare bankruptcy. At that point, he had such control over her that she felt she couldn't refuse. In 2019, they went through with this plan, and the debts were eliminated, but it took a big toll on Brianna, leaving her morally exhausted. The stress caused by Stephen led her to depression, requiring expensive medications. After a few months, she was offered a life insurance policy at work, which depended on her income as a nurse. When she brought it up to Stephen, he agreed it was a good idea. By February 2020, Stephen was still unemployed and was heavily reliant on Brianna. She started to suspect that he might betray her again and feared he was using illegal drugs. To protect herself, Brianna hid her medications from him, but he continued to control her finances and her life. She felt trapped in a toxic relationship and was unsure how to escape, fearing her parents would judge her for wasting time on someone unworthy. Ultimately, she only confided in a few close friends and her sister, sharing her intention to file for divorce. On March 2, 2020, around noon, Stephen called 911, claiming he found his wife, Brianna, unresponsive in the bathroom. The dispatchers instructed him to perform CPR, but throughout the call, he made no attempt to help his wife. Instead, he focused on telling his version of incident while ignoring their instructions. 5 minutes later, when paramedics arrived, a county sheriff's deputy and some of Stephen's family members were already present. It was unusual that an officer, who was supposed to be half an hour away from the incident, arrived even before the paramedics. The Stephen family lived far away, yet they arrived at his house very quickly. Soon after, Brianna's relatives also arrived. Stephen called his mother and sister at 12:20 p.m. after the ambulance had arrived. He informed them that Brianna had ended her life and said he had witnessed similar things in the past. His family was shocked and rushed to the house. The medics tried to revive Brianna, but it was too late. By the time the ambulance arrived, she was already cold, indicating that she had been dead for several hours. A syringe with an 18mm needle was found nearby, leading to speculation that Brianna may have died from an overdose of illegal drugs. Stephen explained that his wife's body had already cooled down when he found her. He said he was preparing to go outside when he heard a loud noise from the bathroom, which sounded like something had fallen. He dismissed it, thinking it was just mobile phone. After going shopping and returning about an hour later, he went upstairs and found his wife lifeless. Brianna's family rejected the idea that her death was due to an overdose. They frequently communicated with her and did not see any signs of substance abuse. As a nurse, Brianna was subject to random screenings for alcohol and illegal drugs at work, and her results were consistently negative. Her colleagues also expressed disbelief, stating they could not imagine her using anything harmful. When Brianna's relatives arrived, they observed that Stephen appeared calm and not overly concerned about the situation. He was even cleaning the bathroom. However, his demeanor changed dramatically, and he became nervous once police officers arrived. While the police were focused on investigating the crime scene, Stephen took a bag of collected garbage from the bathroom and threw it into his pickup truck instead of the trash bin. When the police requested access to Brianna's mobile phone, Stephen refused. However, her sister was able to unlock the phone and discovered that Stephen's last call to Brianna was made at 7:53, a time when he usually would still be asleep after a night of playing video games. When questioned by the police, Stephen claimed he had called her number just to tease her, but he did not explain the nature of the joke. Additionally, at 12:02, after calling 911, Stephen inexplicably sent a text message to Brianna. He could not explain why he would text someone who had already passed away. He also refused to allow the police to inspect his car. After learning that he had thrown the garbage bag away, the investigator had to return to the station to obtain a warrant. This inadvertently allowed Stephen time to get rid of the evidence. He quickly got rid of the garbage and erased any traces of his actions. The crime scene was thoroughly cleaned by the next day, when Brianna's relatives arrived to gather items for the burial. Brianna's sister was shocked to discover that Brianna didn't even own nice underwear. This seemed odd. It also shows that her husband does not allow her to spend any money on herself. The following day, Stephen called Brianna's sister, Brittany, and invited her to his home for a discussion. When she arrived, his relatives were already there. He showed her 2 empty bottles of opioid painkillers and a bag of syringes. Stephen claimed he found these items in a drawer of Brianna's belongings, suggesting she died from a drug overdose due to a long-standing addiction. However, this medication can only be prescribed by prescription, and it certainly does not belong to Brianna. Brittany was sure that Stephen was lying. After Brianna's death, Brittany and her mother went through Brianna's things and didn't find anything missing. They would have been aware if anything was gone. Then, Stephen showed Brittany another drawer that had Brianna's underwear in it. He claimed to have found more evidence there that Brittany and her mother had overlooked. At that point, Brittany started to think that Stephen might have been involved in Brianna's death, and she no longer wanted to listen to him. Brittany went to the funeral home to style her deceased younger sister's hair and makeup, Brianna, despite strong objections from Stephen's family. Upon arriving, she quickly realized why they were so concerned. She discovered her sister's body covered in numerous fresh bruises and over 80 injection marks, some new and others starting to heal. At the time of her death, Brianna was a certified nurse and knew how to administer injections properly. If she had a secret substance addiction, her level of bruising is also not normal. Additionally, some injection sites were located in where Brianna couldn't have reached herself without assistance. They also found signs of trauma on her palms, resembling defensive wounds. The condition of the needle marks indicated they were inflicted about 8 to 12 hours before her death. The nature of some injuries suggested that someone had restrained Brianna while administering the injections. This case cannot be considered end your own life, and it feels like the police are against Brianna. Brittany was able to take several photos of the Brianna body before being removed from the funeral home. She collected crucial evidence indicating that Brianna had died a tragic death. Brittany suspected that Brianna's husband, Stephen, was responsible. At Brianna's funeral, Stephen did not speak to anyone nor offer any greetings. He attempted to fake tears but ultimately had none, and many attendees noticed he appeared very unnatural. Several witnesses said Stephen bragged about connections that could help him evade justice, he even speaking with a mourner who turned out to be a police officer from another city, but he quickly ended the conversation when he realized this. At that time, no one was aware that the deputy sheriff who arrived at the scene before everyone else was related to Stephen. Brianna's sister discovered that this deputy was not included in the investigation records, despite having full access to the crime scene. In October 2020, an investigator contacted Brianna's family to inform them that she had been the victim of a crime. The investigator suggested that she may have been killed because she witnessed another crime and was killed as an unintended witness. However, this theory was never confirmed, and the investigation was eventually closed. Stephen continued to live in the home he shared with his late wife, Brianna. Just a few days after Brianna's death, Stephen's longtime mistress moved in with him. They even renamed Brianna's favorite dogs. He received $160,000 in life insurance money from Brianna's death. Stephen rarely left the house and continued to live a childish lifestyle, spending the insurance money on video games, pouring concrete in front of the house, buying expensive car parts, and acquiring weapons and gifts for his lover. Stephen showered lover with lavish gifts, including jewelry and ostrich leather boots. However, he was unable to afford a tombstone for Brianna's until 6 months later, and this only happened after her relatives pressured him to do so. Brianna's family was appalled by his actions from the start. They sought justice for her by filing complaints with the police and other authorities, but their efforts were in vain. The case was closed, labeled as an accident, and no investigation was conducted to gather evidence or identify suspects. Brianna's family continued to appeal to higher authorities, requesting that the police reopen the investigation, but they were told it was under the jurisdiction of a different police station. The Brianna's family is concerned that Stephen's connections are obstructing the investigation. Despite this, Brianna's sister remained persistent, and the case was reopened. Unfortunately, it was soon discovered that all the evidence had been lost, and no thorough examinations had been conducted during prior investigations. Stephen is still withholding crucial case information from Brianna's sister and mother. Although he claims that access to the medical report from the pathologist is restricted until an official conclusion is reached, this is misleading. He is aware of the report's contents, raising questions about his motives. Eventually, the Brianna's family hired a private detective who was able to uncover various materials. One significant find was video footage from a search of Stephen's car and home, which showed him smiling brightly while leaning over Brianna's lifeless body. Following the public revelation of this footage, Stephen became fearful and installed security cameras around the house. Meanwhile, Brianna's sister Brittany continues to search for evidence that proves Stephen was involved in her younger sister's death. Brittany sent a photo of a package of fentanyl to Brianna's co-workers, who firmly stated that the medicine package did not come from the hospital, as they had never seen such drugs before. It was later revealed that a different drug from another manufacturer was used at their workplace, which had different packaging. This contradicted Stephen's earlier claim that Brianna had become addicted to drugs at work. Moreover, an official request from a medical institution confirmed that Brianna could not have stolen the drugs, as their records were strictly monitored. The large needles found in Brianna's home were not typically used for such drugs, and Brianna, a nurse, was aware of this. Additionally, Brianna's family received a toxicology report about 4 months after her death. The report revealed that her body contained high levels of various psychotropic substances, including of antidepressants and fentanyl, almost double the lethal dose. The Brianna's family believes that Brianna, given her experience with medications, would not have made such a mistake or acted carelessly. When Brittany spoke to the medical examiner responsible for the autopsy and the cause of death determination, he mentioned that the conclusions in the autopsy report heavily relied on the circumstances surrounding the death. They reviewed reports from investigative agencies like the sheriff's office and the coroner's office. Brianna's death certificate states that the immediate cause of death was an overdose, and it categorizes her death as an accident. However, achieving justice remains difficult. The Brianna's family initiated a petition to raise public awareness, which could have helped with legal and social expenses. Unfortunately, they only raised $5,000 instead of the needed $20,000, leaving the majority of the financial burden on Brianna's family. At the funeral, Stephen did not give a farewell speech to his wife, and he chose to remain silent. Brianna's family observed that he displayed no signs of regret or sadness, appearing completely indifferent. This was surprising, especially considering that only 6 months earlier, he had grieved the loss of a friend for nearly a week, yet the death of his wife seemed to have no effect on him. The case of Jamie Bowie. On the evening of Monday, April 16, 1990, Brian Bowie was waiting for his 20-year-old younger sister, Jamie, to come home. Earlier that weekend, she had traveled to Phoenix to visit family and friends, and she was expected to be back in Los Angeles by the start of the work week. Jamie was particularly eager to return because she had her first day of work at a major Hollywood studio the following day, where she would be involved in an important new project. Brian was in their apartment, anticipating celebrating Jamie's upcoming successes. However, as time passed, she still hadn't arrived. He assumed she was just delayed on her journey and decided to go to bed since he needed to wake up early. In the middle of the night, he heard the sound of the door but thought it was Jamie coming back. Feeling exhausted, Brian didn't get up. Instead, he turned over and fell back asleep. Brian woke up in the morning to find that the sun had already risen. He quickly went to check on his sister, Jamie, but she was missing. Brian around the apartment and noticed that some items were out of place, but this didn't give him any clues about what had happened during the night or where Jamie might be now. Since there were no mobile phones at that time, he couldn't find out what had occurred. Brian remembered hearing the sound of the door opening in the middle of the night and thought Jamie had returned, changed her clothes, and left early in the morning before he woke up. However, they had an agreement that she would wake him if she came home late at night or at least in the morning when she got up. For some unknown reason, she hadn't done this. Brian felt confused and speculated that she might have left for some urgent matter. Perhaps she was dealing with car trouble or something related to her new job. Brian needed to prepare for the day, so he started doing his own thing. He left a note for Jamie and headed out. When he returned home that evening, he was terrified to find the note still there and his sister missing. It was concerning because Jamie was about to start her dream job and had been preparing for it. She was usually responsible and would not skip important events without a good reason or letting someone know. What made matters worse was the evidence that someone had been in their apartment while Brian was away. The rooms were disorganized, and items like the stereo system, a suitcase, and some valuables were gone. Brian knew Jamie would never throw things around or take valuables like that. It was clear someone else had entered their home. Scared to be alone, Brian hurried to his nearby friend's house to make a call for help. When the police arrived, Brian explained the situation over the past few days, suspecting that Jamie's disappearance was linked to a burglary. However, the officers dismissed his concerns, viewing it as a typical break-in. They noted the lack of any signs of kidnapping or a struggle, no blood or weapons present. In their view, Jamie was not in the apartment, and they thought any worries Brian had were unfounded. The police created a report about the theft and examined the house. They wanted to ensure that Jamie was not involved in the incident. They reached out to her family in Phoenix. Her relatives confirmed that Jamie had left them on time, and since then they have not seen her. The police speculated that she might have encountered problems on her journey, which was about 600 kilometers long. They thought her car might have broken down, and she would return once she resolved any issues. After this, the police left the house. However, Brian felt something was off. He decided to stay with a friend for a while because he didn't feel safe in the apartment. Brian informed their parents about everything that had happened, and they agreed with him that there were suspicious aspects to the case. They feared something bad had happened to Jamie. As a result, their mother contacted the local police in Arizona and filed a missing persons report for Jamie. The police officers quickly began their investigation. News about the disappearance Jamie's was broadcast on the radio across the state, prompting the launch of a nationwide she search. Jamie's mother provided photos and the description of what her daughter was wearing when she went missing: bright pink pants and a light top. In the meantime, Jamie's father, Joe, and Brian printed and distributed flyers featuring her photograph in both cities. They also made flyers showcasing her car, a blue 1978 Volkswagen Beetle convertible. They handed out flyers along the route Jamie was likely to pass when returning home. The efforts of her family were big, they covering hundreds of kilometers along the highway to search for Jamie and her vehicle. The journey from Phoenix to Los Angeles took at least 6 to 7 hours, and they would have traveled west along Highway 10 to cover that distance. The Jamie family decided to split up to drive along the route each day. During their journey, they visited various motels, cafes, and gas stations, speaking to hundreds of people in hopes of finding any clues about Jamie. A large search operation organized by Jamie's relatives drew significant attention from the local community, leading to rumors that she had been kidnapped and that the police were not thoroughly investigating the case. This has caused the police to investigate the case more thoroughly. Detectives eventually suspect a connection between the robbery at Brian's apartment and Jamie's disappearance, as both incidents occurred around the same time. Meanwhile, Jamie's family continues trying to find her. Jamie's mother frequently posted updates and took on the role of an investigator, questioning staff at roadside businesses. Her determination impressed even the police, as it is uncommon for a mother to be so actively involved in a large-scale search for her child. While many parents might struggle to cope in such situations, she remained focused and resolute, desperately seeking her daughter. However, it's hard to imagine the emotional pain she endured throughout this search. Meanwhile, Jamie's brother and father were also involved, doing their best to gather any information about her whereabouts. The situation became increasingly complicated, especially in some wilderness areas that are devoid of people and infrastructure, which posed a danger to Jamie's life. If search teams had found her in those places, it would have been very unfortunate. Time went by without any leads, and it seemed unlikely that Jamie would be found in the desert. However, the efforts of her family eventually paid off. Shortly after the police launched the rescue operation, several motorists who had heard about the missing girl contacted the police. They reported seeing a young woman resembling Jamie in a blue convertible Volkswagen Beetle parked by the side of the road, seemingly having car trouble. Witnesses described a couple of dark-skinned individuals who were helping the girl with her car. They stood beside her. But witnesses did not intervene and did not notice anything suspicious. It's important to mention that Jamie was a strikingly attractive person, and her distinctive car made her stand out. This caught the attention of witnesses, enabling them to provide crucial information quickly. After receiving these leads, detectives went to the location where the witnesses had seen Jamie. There, they met witnesses, who recognized her from the photo, Jamie, and confirmed what they had seen. The witnesses were able to provide investigators with detailed information about what they witnessed. They explained that while resting in a truck parking lot, they saw a girl standing by the roadside. She had exited her car and opened the hood because her engine was smoking. Shortly after, a couple arrived in a red car. The man was driving, and his wife was in the passenger seat. After starting her car again, the girl drove away, and the couple followed closely behind her until they vanished from sight. This incident occurred in the middle of a deserted highway. Initially, witnesses thought nothing of the situation. However, when they learned about the young woman's Jamie disappearance, they began to have doubts. They started to suspect that the couple who had helped the girl might actually be connected to her abduction. Meanwhile, the police intensified their search for Jamie, focusing on the section of the highway where witnesses had seen the events unfold. They concentrated on the central desert area, where there was a higher likelihood of finding someone in distress. Despite searching hundreds of kilometers of road, they found no trace of the blue convertible Jamie's. It seemed to have completely vanished. The situation was much more complex because it occurred during a time without the internet. People didn't have mobile phones, making communication difficult. There were no geotags, GPS tracking, or surveillance cameras available. The police seized their only chance by placing a large poster along the highway featuring a picture of Jamie's and her car. They requested that anyone with helpful information come forward to assist in the search for she. While many individuals quickly contacted the department, unfortunately, most of the calls were from people seeking attention without offering any valuable information. In total, they received about 200 calls, but none of the calls yielded the expected results. Hence, a lot of time is wasted in handling these useless calls. About a month after Jamie was reported missing, a witness working in an orchard contacted the police. He discovered a body in the irrigation system. The police quickly arrived at the scene and found the body of a girl in very poor condition. Her clothing closely resembled what Jamie's relatives described, including bright pink pants and a light top. However, investigators did not rush to identify her. Before waiting for the forensic examination results, the police estimated that the body had been there for about a month. During the search, they also found a spent shotgun shell at the scene, making it impossible to determine the cause of death without an autopsy. The presence of the shell suggested that the girl had been shot, indicating that the orchard was the crime scene. The forensic expert revealed during the autopsy that the victim had been shot twice. It was found that the first shot occurred while the girl was standing on the ground. A gun was aimed at her, leading her to instinctively raise her hand in defense. She likely attempted to flee, but the attacker was quicker. The shot injured her arm and struck her face and head, resulting in a fatal outcome. Following this, she fell into an irrigation channel and was shot in the back. The victim was identified as Jamie Bowie, who had been reported missing. Her body was discovered in an orchard near Indio, California. Investigators realized why Jamie had remained missing for so long. The area is very remote and sparsely populated. The only way to spot something in the irrigation ditch is to come across it directly. It isn't visible from a distance. Additionally, there are very few people around, mostly just wild animals. Everyone was shocked by what happened. Jamie was friendly, beautiful, and full of ambition. Her family and friends adored her, especially her brother, who shared a close with her. Jamie had her whole life ahead of her, so who could be so cruel as to end it? Jamie's brother, Brian, informed investigators that she had always aspired to work in Hollywood, and just days before her untimely death, she had secured a job there. Jamie had recently become a PR manager at a major studio. While the Jamie family was grieving, detectives focused on a key piece of evidence, a blue Volkswagen Beetle convertible that was last seen with Jamie. No one had spotted the car since Jamie was helped to repair it by two unidentified black individuals. The police concentrated on locating this suspicious couple, believing they might be connected to her death. Despite months of fruitless searching, but about a year and a half after Jamie's brutal murder, the case took a new turn. The police station received information about a blue convertible belonging. They confirmed it was indeed the convertible related to the investigation, as the license plates matched those on the wanted list. However, there was one strange detail: the car had been repainted black and appeared to be abandoned. The police thoroughly examined the car but found no clues inside. To identify the driver, they held a press conference to seek help from witnesses through the media. While this approach didn't always yield results, they still hoped that this time someone will respond. Eventually, a witness called in, claiming to have seen his neighbor driving the car. This revelation surprised the investigators. They interviewed the witness in detail, and he provided useful information about the neighbor. The police then summoned the neighbor for questioning, which complicated matters further. He revealed that he had stolen the car several months earlier. In exchange for valuable information to aid their investigation, the detectives assured him he would not face theft charges. The man agreed and explained that after stealing the car, he discovered it had electrical issues. He then took it to a repair shop. When the mechanic asked if the car was stolen, he mentioned seeing a similar car owned by someone else with similar electrical problems. Fearing exposure, the thief decided to abandon the convertible. He repainted it black and moved it away from his home. He provided the police with the address of the repair shop, where they learned who had previously contacted the mechanic about a problematic car. The detectives tracked down the owner of the shop where the convertible was stolen. During their meeting, the owner revealed that he had purchased the convertible from a black couple who arrived in a red Volkswagen. This couple had previously assisted a girl with car repairs and then sold her vehicle, indicating they were aware of Jamie's situation. The investigators intensified their questioning of the shop owner to gather more information about the couple. He provided a crucial lead. He had a sales contract for the vehicle, dated just one day after Jamie was reported missing. The document included the seller's signature, and suddenly, the case that had been cold for over a year began to progress rapidly. The sales contract listed a man named Billy Ray Rakes. At the time of the sale, he was 45 years old and lived in the Los Angeles area with his 28-year-old wife, Hilda. Detectives looked into Billy's background and discovered he had a violent criminal history. He was notorious for having killed his own brother during a fight. His criminal activities began in the 1970s when he vandalized a police office in Compton. He had a history of stealing Kwanzaa cars, which no longer seemed coincidental. Billy was a dangerous individual capable of brutal acts, and Jamie's chance meet with him led to her tragic fate. When detectives arrived at the couple's home, they were not there, they had already fled. The police sought assistance from the media and labeled the couple, believed to be African American, as fugitives. Once this information was made public, it became apparent that the couple had more enemies than allies. The police station received a flood of calls with tips about their whereabouts and activities. It was revealed that Billy had a plane ticket to the Turks and Caicos Islands, a former British colony in the Caribbean. He was still in the city due to difficulties obtaining a passport. Authorities discovered the suspect's hiding place and, based on the tips, set up an ambush in a parking lot, capturing them as they approached their home. After the arrest, the police decision was made to separate Hilda and Billy to compare their statements and extract a confession. Hilda and Billy were taken to a citrus garden in Indio in different cars. During this time, Hilda was extremely anxious, nearing a nervous breakdown. She was also not given any information by the police, which heightened her fear. This worked in favor of the investigation, as a person in such a distressed state is more likely to divulge information. Which is exactly what happened during the interrogation. In the interrogation room, Hilda recounted the story about Jamie's disappearance, but now included more gruesome details. She claimed that they encountered Jamie on Highway 10. Jamie's car had broken down and was experiencing engine troubles. Billy offered assistance, managed to start the car, but warned Jamie that she needed to get to a service station urgently. They suggested Jamie follow them to the nearest place where her car could be repaired or to the city where she would be safe. Jamie agreed and placed her trust in the strangers, Hilda and Billy. After reaching the nearest settlement, Jamie invited the couple Hilda and Billy to dinner at a restaurant. She felt very thankful and even promised that after she received her first wages from her new job, she would pay Billy for his help. Jamie seemed to trust the couple completely, which they took advantage of. First, Billy told Hilda that he planned to steal a car from Jamie, as he usually did. Hilda agreed because she knew it was safer not to oppose him. However, things escalated. He intended to use a shotgun. Hilda had no idea that her husband was planning to kill Jamie. She later admitted that she only realized the plot involved Jamie's death while they were at the restaurant, where Jamie was treating them. When Jamie got up to go to the restroom, Billy revealed his intentions and discussed with Hilda how they would harm Jamie. After that, Jamie drove away in her car, with Hilda and Billy following her. Eventually, they stopped Jamie's car and kidnapped her. They attempted to use her bank card at an ATM 100 kilometers from Los Angeles and later went to a bank in India, but found no money in her account. Hilda initially wanted to talk Billy out of this plan, but eventually gave up as she became frightened for her own safety. In their relationship, Hilda was clearly submissive. Her husband, Billy, dominated her and he likely would not hesitate to use physical force to assert his control. According to Hilda, Billy ordered Jamie to follow him into the dangerous desert, and Jamie complied. Moments later, Hilda heard 2 gunshots. Only Billy returned to the car. Hilda wasn't sure what he had done to Jamie, but she was certain that Jamie was no longer alive. Despite her fears, she remained silent and didn't ask Billy anything. However, Billy's plans didn't end there. He intended to rob Jamie's apartment. He kept her keys and took her driver's license, which helped him discover her address. While Jamie's brother, Brian, was asleep in the apartment, Billy broke in. But he did not know about this. He was solely focused on stealing valuables. After grabbing what he needed, Billy left the apartment. If Jamie's brother had woken up during the robbery, he might have suffered the same fate as Jamie. Fortunately, he remained asleep throughout the ordeal. However, Billy did not stop there. He returned to the apartment during the day to retrieve more valuables. When the police searched the apartment he shared with Hilda, they found some of these stolen items. Additional stolen goods were found at a pawn shop in Denver, where Billy admitted they had sold them for $2,000. They were looking to make quick cash, which is why they sold the car for such a low price. During his interrogation, Billy tried to shift the blame to his wife, Hilda, for the crime, but his account contradicted all the evidence that had already been found. The police were clear about who was responsible for the brutal murder. Moreover, Billy's criminal history made it even more apparent. In the end, the prosecutor's office offered Hilda a plea bargain, requiring her to give incriminating testimony against her husband, Billy. Under state law, the penalty for his crime was death, so Hilda agreed to cooperate with the prosecution. She admitted to being guilty of murder, even though she did not actually pull the trigger. Despite having the chance, she did not warn Jamie about the impending danger. As a result, Hilda received a life sentence but was eligible for parole after 25 years. During the trial, which began in 1994, Hilda testified against Billy. The prosecution faced a big challenge due to the lack of physical evidence. At that time, DNA testing was not widely available, and there were no other technologies to provide crucial evidence. Billy also sought a deal with the prosecution but was denied. Subsequently, he attempted to claim insanity to avoid responsibility for his violent actions, but this strategy failed. Billy Ray Riggs never admitted to being involved in the death of Jamie Bowie. The jury carefully reviewed the case materials before finding him guilty of premeditated murder. He faced the death penalty, which he feared greatly. The jury unanimously supported this decision because of Billy's cruel treatment of Jamie. He robbed her of her future. The verdict is crucial for Jamie's family, who are trying to get over her tragic death. They believe Jamie fell victim to her own naivety, she having trusted strangers too much, which ultimately cost her life. Hilda Riggs was released from prison in November 2014. Her husband, Billy Ray Riggs, has submitted several appeals, but all of them have been denied. He is currently on death row, waiting for his execution. The case of Aisling Murphy. Aisling Murphy, born in 1998, was the youngest of 3 siblings. Her family lived in Blue Ball, Ireland, a peaceful town about an hour's drive from Dublin. Aisling grew up in a loving environment, influenced by her father's passion for music, particularly the bagpipes and violin. Inspired by him, she began studying traditional Irish music. She joined a youth choir in school and later became part of an orchestra, performing folk music at various events across Ireland and Great Britain. She was talented, independent, and sociable, which allowed her to integrate well with her team and feel comfortable on stage. After graduating from school, Aisling quickly sought employment. She was determined to achieve complete independence from her parents, so she began searching for full-time job opportunities right after receiving her diploma. Despite her career ambitions, she continued to nurture her love for music. She often performed for her relatives during special family gatherings on weekends, which further strengthened their connections. Aisling wanted to create her own family someday, but first, she focused on establishing herself. She went to college and became a first-grade teacher at a school where she had previously studied. This moment in her life was very meaningful. The teachers and students appreciated Aisling for her energy, kindness, and creativity. Aisling was truly suited for this role due to her strong moral character. She made a smooth transition from being an excellent student to becoming a wonderful teacher. Aisling was friendly, well-mannered, sweet, and self-assured. During her first week of work, she taught music on weekends, showing her passion for her job and her enjoyment of working with children. At 28, she had been in a relationship with her boyfriend, Ryan, for over 6 years. They met when Aisling was just 15. Initially, their romance didn't last, and they broke up after a few months. However, they eventually reunited, realizing that they were too young when they first started dating as teenagers. Their feelings for each other reignited, and they fell deeply in love, often talking about their future, including marriage and children. They had planned a trip in 2 days, but unfortunately, it seemed their dreams would not come to fruition. Aisling finished her workday and planned to go for a run along the Grand Canal in Tullamore. This was a routine activity for her, as she enjoyed fitness and outdoor recreation. She loved walking or running in beautiful locations, so she often visited the canal when she could. The Grand Canal was a popular spot for runners, featuring a designated path for walking. It was usually busy, which made Aisling comfortable going there alone. After work, Aisling got ready for her run. She first went home to change her clothes and tell her mother about her schedule. Her mother reassured her daughter that she was old enough to take care of herself and that there was no danger in this. Aisling left, and that was the last time her mother saw her alive. About an hour after Aisling left home, two runners warming up along the Grand Canal called for help. They were running on one side of the canal and saw a man attacking a girl on the opposite bank. Since they didn't have mobile phones, they ran to the nearest payphone to report the incident. They informed the emergency dispatcher that they had witnessed a threatening man assaulting one of the female runners. The witnesses confirmed that the victim was still alive when the attacker dragged her into the bushes. She screamed and fought back, desperately trying to push him away, but she was clearly outmatched. The dispatchers sent police officers to the specified location. Upon arrival, the police and a witness found the body of a young woman at the canal. The young girl, who showed no signs of life, was found to have been severely beaten, as the caller had reported. She had been pulled off the paved road and into the bushes, where she suffered physical abuse. Her face and neck were covered in cuts, and her hair was matted with dried blood. Paramedics arrived and attempted to resuscitate her for 10 minutes, but they were unable to save her and confirmed her death. While the exact cause of death remained unclear, it was evident she had been beaten badly. The body of the murdered girl was sent for an autopsy, which revealed stab and cut wounds on her neck. A forensic expert identified 11 injuries, primarily on the right side of her neck, including a cut throat that rendered her unable to call for help. Signs of possible strangulation were also found. The victim was identified as Aisling Murphy. On her hands, there were deep cuts, likely sustained during a struggle. Keys were discovered near her body, and it was determined she had used them defensively, gripping them tightly in an effort to fight off her attacker. The weapon used in the attack did not inflict enough damage to prevent the criminal from continuing his assault. Aisling died from severe blood loss caused by multiple stab wounds to her neck, leading to her death within minutes. Near her body, police found sunglasses and a mobile phone in her jacket pocket. An abandoned bicycle was also found nearby, likely belonging to the attacker. The criminal had already fled the scene after harming his innocent victim. The brutality of the attack was shocking, especially since it occurred in broad daylight in a crowded area with witnesses. Two runners who were in the vicinity witnessed the crime. They observed both the attack and the assailant. They provided vital information to the police. The first witness, Emma, reported that she was walking her dog by the Grand Canal when she noticed a girl jogging. She saw a man on a bright green bicycle closely following the jogger. Initially, Emma thought they might be running together because the cyclist stayed so close to the girl. She described the cyclist as looking like a migrant, not Irish. He had yellowish skin, a short haircut, and was wearing a black tracksuit with red logos. Later, Emma met another witness, Jenna, and together they witnessed the cyclist attack the girl. The attack appeared sudden and unprovoked. Jenna witnessed the attack and provided a detailed account. Her description matched that of another witness, who reported that the victim screamed, threatening the attacker, but then suddenly fell silent. This silence was caused by a wound to Aisling's neck that severely severed her vocal cords. Later, Jenna screamed loudly, threatening to call the police. Despite the threats, the attacker did not let go of the victim. Police found a green bicycle near the trail that belonged to the attacker. Meanwhile, police gathered more evidence and discovered that Aisling had been wearing a fitness tracker while running. The device recorded her body metrics, including speed, distance, and heart rate, helping to clarify the details surrounding her death. The data showed that Aisling started running at 2:51 p.m., and before that, GPS records showed she had parked her bike near the canal. After that, her pulse was around 100 beats per minute, indicating she was in an active phase. She maintained this heart rate until 15:21, during which she ran approximately 3 kilometers. However, after 15:21, her heart rate changed. the Aisling experienced erratic fluctuations, and GPS data showed she was standing still at that time. This was clearly when she was attacked, and by 15:31, her heart had stopped beating. The next step for the police was to review footage from surveillance cameras in the area. Police identified the locations of all recording devices, hoping to find video that would show the suspect, the victim, and the attack itself. Police checked surveillance cameras, focusing on the time frame between 12:25 and 16:05, and were able to identify a man who matched the witness description exactly. It appeared that he was moving randomly along the roads. They determined that this man had appeared long before Aisling's arrival and was using a bicycle identical to the one found at the crime scene. The prime suspect was wearing a black hoodless jacket and sweatpants with stripes down the side, and also had a red logo on his clothes, as Emma described. He had been following a woman in a dark burgundy jacket but was later spotted by her. He had been looking at the victim with interest, but for some unknown reason he quickly fell behind. In footage from another camera, the suspect stops at 1:53 p.m. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out an object. He is seen holding and twisting something in his hand, but the poor quality of the footage makes it difficult to determine what it is. Police suspect he pulled out a knife, which he then used to kill Aisling. A forensic expert concluded that Aisling was killed with a small serrated knife, as the wounds had jagged edges. The man was seen again on surveillance footage at around 2:55 p.m., just as Aisling began training on the trail. Police discovered that the suspect had been wandering around the area, apparently looking for victims, as he occasionally focused on different women. He followed these women at a distance but lost interest until he came across Aisling, whom he decided to attack. Unfortunately, the surveillance cameras did not capture high-quality images that could help identify the criminal. Hours after the attack, a suspect was arrested based on information from witnesses. The suspect, Griot Keegan, is a 39-year-old Romanian immigrant who has lived in Ireland for 23 years and has no criminal record. He matched the person seen on surveillance cameras and found near the scene of the attack. At the police station, he vehemently denied any involvement in the incident. While police were questioning him, police obtained a search warrant and thoroughly searched his house, but found no evidence of his guilt. Griot maintained that there had been a mistake. He provided an alibi that was verified. He had been in a store making a purchase, which was confirmed by his receipt and surveillance footage. After that, he was seen walking along the south bank of the canal while the murder occurred on the north bank. The suspect's fingerprints and DNA samples were collected to compare with skin particles found under the Aisling's nails and on the bicycle, but there was no match. This confirmed that he was not involved in the crime. He was cleared of all suspicions and released. However, for some time, he and his family received threats as local residents still viewed him as a murderer. He was temporarily provided with alternative housing, and the police issued a public statement clarifying that Griot was not connected to the crime. Only after this did the public stop harassing him. This case received wide publicity across the country. The local community was outraged by the attack on Aisling and called on the police to quickly identify and arrest the perpetrators responsible for the tragic death of a talented young woman in broad daylight. For days, police have been trying to piece together clues, and the situation has taken a surprising turn. On the evening following the attack, a 30-year-old man named Josef Puska was admitted to a hospital in Dublin with abdominal injuries. Josef was originally from a small village in Slovakia. He left school at 16 without finishing his education and spent most of his life working as a laborer in the Czech Republic. Although he faced challenges in his lifestyle and at school, Josef was not involved with bad influences, had no criminal record, and was generally seen as a positive individual. In 2015, he moved to Dublin, Ireland, where he and his wife planned to settle permanently. He continued his work as a builder, and during their time there, they welcomed 5 children. Everything seemed to be going well until he suffered a back injury at work. After his recovery, Yosef found that he could not return to his previous activities. The back injury was more severe than he had anticipated, leading him to receive disability benefits. He spent a significant amount of time in the hospital, and afterward, he relied on state support. The financial situation was tight, so his wife had to work. Yosef had limited proficiency in Irish and struggled with English, which made it difficult for him to communicate with medical staff when he went to the hospital the day after Aisling's murder. He needed an interpreter for assistance. Thanks to the interpreter, Yosef explained that he was in Blanchardstown the previous day, January 12th. He took a taxi there and noticed he was being followed as soon as he arrived, but he did not think much of it since it was daytime. Suddenly, the attackers assaulted him, stabbing him multiple times in the stomach before they ran away. He managed to get home, where he informed his family about the incident and called for an ambulance. Doctors discovered cuts on Yosef's hands, signs of defensive wounds. He had multiple stab wounds in his abdomen and received painkillers before a 2-hour surgery. The surgery was completed around 10 o'clock. The doctors concluded that Yosef's injuries were from stab wounds inflicted by a small knife, but they were not life-threatening. He remained in the hospital for several days to recover. As part of their protocol, the doctors informed the police about the incident. Officers came to speak with Yosef, who was the victim of another attack. Police suspected that the same criminal who attacked Aisling might also be responsible for Yosef's injuries. During the conversation, Yosef's behavior became increasingly awkward and suspicious. He seemed confused, struggled to recall simple details, and appeared noticeably nervous. Police began to question whether this unemployed man could be connected to Aisling's murder. The next day, the police returned to the hospital to continue questioning and gather more details. This time, Yosef gave more specific answers. He explained that he had taken a taxi to the city to meet a woman he had met online. Yosef then revealed that he was married with 5 children but did not want his wife to know about his secret encounters. It was later discovered that he had registered on several dating websites and was regularly seeing different women. His wife remained unaware of his affair, as Yosef was very careful to keep it a secret. The police asked Yosef if he owned a bicycle. He replied that he had a green bicycle that he had used for a long time. However, when they inquired whether he had been riding it on the day of the murder, Yosef started to stutter and claimed that his bicycle had been stolen over 2 weeks ago. He had not reported the theft to the police, which raised suspicions. Yosef then appeared increasingly anxious, prompting police to leave his hospital room. The police also discovered that he had been near the canal around 6 p.m. that same day. They obtained a warrant to search his apartment, allowing them to collect his clothing and mobile phone for forensic analysis. They called Yosef to inform him of this. Sensing something was amiss, he directly asked the police, through an interpreter, if he was a suspect. The officers reassured him that they were merely trying to clarify the situation and needed to conduct an examination. This conversation occurred over the phone. After the police answered, the Yosef paused for a long moment. Then he turned to the translator and asked him to accurately relay his words to the police officer. Yosef admitted that he had killed the girl by the canal, but he insisted that it was unintentional and an accident. Later, the Yosef addressed the police directly. He explained that he was riding his bicycle along a path when he encountered an unfamiliar girl. He had a knife in his hand and accidentally cut her in the neck after losing his balance. She became angry, which frightened Yosef, and he claimed he struck her in the stomach with an object that resembled a knife. He said he tried to remain calm, hoping the girl would settle down. However, she began screaming and threatening him even more, forcing Yosef to defend himself. He then attacked her, repeatedly stabbing her in the neck with his knife. She fought back desperately, but he was able to overpower her. The police were taken aback by his phone confession, finding the story hard to believe. It seemed implausible that Yosef could accidentally stab the victim in the neck before she attacked him. They questioned how Aisling could have had a knife. Yosef expressed fear of retaliation. He believed that if Aisling's friends and relatives learned of the incident, they might harm his children and wife. He asked the police to keep the names of his family members confidential. The police assured Yosef that he would not face prosecution as he would soon be arrested and put on trial. After being discharged from hospital, he was immediately arrested for murder. Afterward, the Yosef changed his story and refused to confess. Despite this, the prosecutor's office viewed him as the only person who could have harmed Aisling that day. They decided to seek the maximum punishment for the murderer. The initial trial date was set for June 2023, but there were several delays, and it wasn't until October 2023 that the prosecution presented the case to the jury. During the trial, prosecutors played surveillance footage showing an attacker who looked like Yosef cycling along a path near the canal for hours before targeting Aisling. His actions were typical of a predator looking for prey. Forensic experts found traces of DNA under Aisling's fingernails, suggesting she fought back and injured her attacker. DNA from tissue samples matched Yosef, and his fingerprints were found on a green bicycle. All witnesses who saw the attacker that day identified him as Yosef. New evidence emerged during the investigation, particularly from one of Yosef's friends, a Slovakian bus driver. On the night of January 12th, while working, he encountered Yosef, who had severe scratches on his stomach. Concerned, the driver offered Yosef a ride home. Yosef mentioned he had gotten into a fight but did not provide details about the incident. During the drive, the bus driver repeatedly questioned Yosef about what had happened, but Yosef avoided giving clear answers and kept holding his stomach, which was bleeding. The driver grew increasingly worried, suspecting that the injuries might be linked to the ethnic cleansing events happening at that time. As there were widespread expressions of hatred against other nationalities. To deflect his friend's questions, Yosef concocted a story about being attacked by a masked man, claiming he couldn't identify the attacker because he hadn't seen his face before and didn't know him. Yosef attempted to portray himself as a hero, claiming he had seen a masked stranger attacking a woman near the canal. Yosef claimed he was stabbed multiple times as he tried to approach the bleeding girl. He became frightened when he realized what had happened and then fled. Despite being suspected of murder, he began to insist that he was actually the savior, having been injured in a fight with the real attacker. However, this new account does not clarify how his DNA was found under Aisling's fingernails or his fingerprints on the green bike he left behind. Yosef's defense argued that his false confession about the attack on Aisling resulted from the painkillers he received in the hospital, which caused him to feel euphoric and led him to speak to himself. Yosef stated that he was under the influence of these drugs when the police began their interrogation. However, doctors who treated Yosef contradicted this claim. They stated that he only received a minimal dose of the medication, meaning it could not have significantly affected him by the time he made his confession. The prosecution highlighted that Yosef had changed his testimony multiple times, making his statements unreliable. However, this posed a challenge for the prosecution because Yosef had no history of violence, especially against women. There were no indications of aggression or cruelty in his behavior, and he had no connection to Aisling, raising questions about his motive for the attack. The prosecution argued that the incident was not a result of personal issues. The trial lasted 3 weeks, after which a jury of 12 members returned their verdict. They deliberated for 3 hours before finding Yosef Puska guilty of the murder of Aisling Murphy. As a result, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The circumstances surrounding Aisling's murder shocked the nation. Just days after the tragedy, protests were held across Ireland in support of the victim's family, and the case shocked the nation. During the investigation, police determined that Joseph had attacked Aisling without any apparent motive. He did not know her. He appeared to be a predator who had been searching for a victim for hours. Unfortunately, Aisling fell victim to a monster. The case of Bruce Pardo. In December 2008, the Ortega family invited their adult children and their families to their beautiful home in Covina, California, to celebrate Christmas. Covina is a quiet town with a low crime rate, located about 30 kilometers from Los Angeles. Joseph and Alice Ortega cherished Christmas as a time to bring their loved ones together. They had 5 children, 2 sons, Charles and James, and 3 daughters, Alicia, Letitia, and Sylvia. During this festive gathering, they engaged in their traditional poker games, enjoying laughter and joy while celebrating together. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. No one suspected that the person at the door intended to harm the Ortega family. So, they opened the door without hesitation. A few minutes later, a neighbor called 911 in a panic, yelling that the house across the street was on fire. He urgently requested firefighters to come quickly. Chaos unfolded at the scene. Firefighters were dispatched immediately to put out the flames. However, by the time they arrived, the emergency service had received several more calls from concerned neighbors. Some reported hearing gunfire, while others mentioned seeing people fleeing the house and crying for help. All available emergency crews were sent to manage the situation. Later, one of the police officers who arrived at the house described the scene as an apocalypse. Everything was on fire, and a large number of special service personnel and equipment had arrived, causing many people to rush around. Most neighbors came out of their homes, watching helplessly as firefighters worked to put out the flames at the Ortega family's house. In the midst of this chaos, they quickly located Letitia and Katrina, her 8-year-old daughter, who had managed to escape the violence. Remarkably, both survived. Initially, it was thought they had fled the fire, but the reality was much more disturbing. When the police arrived, Letitia was no longer at the house. Her daughter had been seriously injured by a gunshot and was taken to the hospital, where doctors were fighting to save her life. Letitia, a key witness, was interviewed at the hospital and shared a shocking story that disturbed the entire city. She explained that during Christmas celebrations, a man dressed as Santa Claus came to the Ortega family's home. Instead of spreading holiday cheer, he pulled out a gun and started shooting. After the attack, the man in the Santa costume set the house on fire to destroy evidence. Due to her injuries, Letitia couldn't provide further details. Neighbors backed up Letitia's account, saying that at around 2:45 a.m., they saw a strange car with a Santa Claus image driving away from a dead-end street near her home. In an effort to apprehend the shooter, police quickly began investigating who had been in the area at the time. After firefighters extinguished the fire, they found the bodies of the victims amid the rubble. In total, 9 people were killed, and their bodies were burned beyond recognition. Forensic experts later confirmed that only the hosts and their daughter had died from gunshot wounds. The other guests suffered from gunshot wounds to varying degrees, but ultimately died from smoke inhalation and fire. Some of the bodies were so badly mutilated that they could only be identified through dental records. The initial situation worsened and police discovered another victim in a pool of blood in nearby Silmar, California. Bruce Pardo was found dead by his brother, who had just returned from a Christmas party. Upon the police's arrival, they discovered 40-year-old Bruce had a single fatal gunshot wound to the head. Police initially thought Bruce ended his own life, as a 9mm pistol was found lying on his knees, with another gun lying on the floor next to him. Police confirmed that Bruce had recently finalized his divorce from Sylvia, from whom he had officially separated on December 18, 2008. Notably, Sylvia's maiden name was Arte, and she was involved in the Coven massacre. Police quickly suspected a connection between the murders. They believe that Bruce's death was staged to look like a voluntary act, implying that the real criminal wanted to conceal his involvement. It is believed that Bruce, who was allegedly the attacker, disguised as Santa Claus, ended his own life. The murders. Forensic analysis revealed that each of the 9 victims had been shot at least once. All the bodies had 9mm caliber bullets, which matched the weapon found beside Bruce's body. Later, police encountered Letitia. Despite the assailant's disguise, she was able to identify him. She claimed he closely resembled Bruce Pardo. Other family members present during the shooting were shouting this as well. With her testimony, police returned to the crime scene where Bruce's body was found. They began searching Bruce's car and discovered bloody footprints. They also confirmed that neighbors had seen the same car in the bay that evening, just before it fled the scene as the fire broke out. Bruce had asked Sylvia Ortega's parents, Joseph and Alice, to arrange a family get-together on Christmas Eve. This tradition involved the entire family getting together every year to play themed games. However, the holiday made them an easy target for a mysterious attacker dressed as Santa Claus. The attacker created a terrifying nightmare. It seemed that the attacker had harbored a deep hatred for the family, leading to such a horrific act, showing no mercy even to the children. Bruce had a negative attitude toward his ex-wife, Sylvia, and her family, which fueled his actions. The fire and shooting caused the most harm to Sylvia and her parents, whom Bruce despised. He was aware of the family's annual Christmas celebration and likely planned his attack in advance. This all felt too calculated to be a coincidence. Letitia continued recounting the events of that day. The Ortega family was gathered in large numbers. Sylvia, who was divorced from Bruce at the time, was present along with her 4 siblings, some of whom brought their children. Additionally, several friends attended the party. With so many people there, no one could recall the exact number of guests. During the celebration, just before midnight, they heard the doorbell ring. Although they weren't expecting any more guests, Sylvia's 8-year-old niece, Katrina, went to the door and looked through the peephole. She spotted Santa on the other side, dressed in his familiar red and white suit and carrying a bag. Excited, she told everyone about it. The adults exchanged puzzled glances, as they hadn't arranged for any entertainers in costumes. Later, neighbors mentioned that they had seen a man in a Santa suit approaching the Ortega family's home around the same time. One neighbor waved to him and wished him a Merry Christmas. The neighbor recounted that Santa Claus stopped at the Ortega house's doorstep, rang the doorbell, and waited. The neighbor then stopped watching, assuming it was just an Ortega family celebration. However, as he closed his door, he suddenly heard gunshots and screams, prompting him to call 911. The Santa suit fooled the guests, who thought a surprise was planned for them. They did not ask who the guests were and opened the door. He brought a bag, but instead of gifts, it contained guns and a homemade flamethrower. Letitia, Katrina's mother, grabbed a video camera to capture the festive moment. At that moment, Letitia heard applause. Her daughter Katrina ran toward Santa, who stood at the door with a large red bag. However, instead of presents, he pulled out a gun and aimed it at the child's face. Santa shot Katrina before anyone could react. Following that, he began firing at everyone in his path. Chaos erupted in the house as he ran out of bullets. He quickly retrieved a second gun with a full magazine. The assailant showed no mercy, even targeting children. In the ensuing panic, parents and 2 sisters sought refuge under the dining table. The attacker clearly saw his victims and shot them at close range, firing multiple shots at each, mostly in the back and head. Santa moved among them, continuing to shoot at the defenseless. He went through the rooms of the house checking and shooting everyone he saw. One of the bullets hit Sylvia's brother, James. Her other brother, Charles, screamed that he recognized the shooter. He barely had time to say Bruce Pardo's name before several gunshots rang out, and he was silenced forever. After moving through the house and leaving a trail of blood, Santa decided to destroy the evidence of his crime. He pulled a homemade flamethrower from his gift bag and began spraying fuel on the victims and surrounding furniture. Immediately, the entire first floor was engulfed in flames. Letitia said that the Santa suit caught fire and the attacker to flee the scene. This gave Letitia the opportunity to reach her daughter and take her to safety, but she was unable to save anyone else. Her child suffered serious head injuries, prompting a neighbor to quickly call emergency services. A 16-year-old boy and 2 other guests, along with everyone in the living room within sight of the attacker, were injured or killed. The survivors could only watch helplessly as the house burned, especially when a gas cylinder exploded inside. Firefighters arrived shortly after to extinguish the fire, with nearly 80 people on the scene. Despite their efforts, it took them an hour and a half to bring the fire under control. Police were initially skeptical, but a thorough investigation of the crime scene and autopsy confirmed that Bruce had indeed ended his own life, as no one else was in the house when he pulled the trigger. He also suffered severe third-degree burns to his arms and legs. Letitia mentioned that his Santa suit had caught fire during the incident, raising doubts about whether Bruce was actually responsible for the crime. It was clear to everyone that Bruce and Sylvia met through a mutual friend at work. At the time, Sylvia was divorced and had 3 children from her previous marriage. She and Bruce quickly connected and started dating. Their relationship progressed rapidly, and by December 2006, they decided to get married. Following their wedding, they bought a lovely house to accommodate their growing family. Bruce had a stable job as an electrical engineer at a large local company and also volunteered at the local Catholic church. Generally, people viewed him as a positive and helpful person, always willing to assist others in difficult situations, unless the conversation turned to money. Bruce always aimed to become wealthy. He worked hard, which allowed him to buy a boat and several cars over time. With their good income, he and his wife were able to purchase an expensive house with a mortgage, making their first payment together. However, since the house was located in a high-end area, their relationship began to suffer. By 2007, Sylvia started to voice her frustrations more often, feeling overwhelmed by the responsibilities she had to shoulder. She worked and earned a good salary while also raising 3 children, whom Bruce did not help with. Despite this, he took on most of the financial responsibilities for repaying the mortgage. Sylvia felt that Bruce did not contribute enough to their common goals. Despite this, she still took care of his dog. They had a joint savings account, but she believed that she did more to support them financially. Conflict arose over money because Bruce was stingy, which frustrated Sylvia. They had originally agreed that Sylvia would support her 3 children from a previous relationship, so Bruce refused to spend money on them. At first, their family life was relatively stable, but Bruce's greed soon began to annoy Sylvia. She expected their savings to total around $88,000. In 2007, when she checked the account, she discovered that Bruce had transferred all their savings to his personal account, leaving only $9,000. This incident significantly strained their marriage. Later, Sylvia learned that Bruce had been unfaithful throughout their marriage. From the beginning, he insisted he didn't want children and denied being a father until Sylvia found out from his mother that he had a child. Bruce had a normal childhood. His school years were normal and free of negative influences. He was quite intelligent. As a result, he entered California State University, Northridge. After completing his studies, he took a job as an electrical engineer at a large research company. Bruce excelled in his profession, which brought him recognition and rapid advancement in his career. However, this was not enough for him. Bruce became focused on the earnings of his colleagues and developed jealousy whenever someone made more money than he did. To cope with this, he started claiming more working hours than he actually worked. Those who knew him well described this behavior as an obsession with money. This obsession ultimately resulted in his dismissal when the deceit was discovered. Relatives noted that Bruce struggled with relationships with women. Although he was attractive and dated many, these relationships often ended abruptly. Financial problems were a constant issue in his life. Bruce started dating a colleague named Dea, and they both seemed serious about their relationship, even planning a wedding together. However, financial concerns became a point of contention. Despite having a good income and some savings, Bruce was unwilling to spend money on a lavish wedding, considering it a waste. He preferred a simpler celebration, but Dea, who was set on having a grand wedding, chose to pay for the extravagant event she had always wanted. Dea took care of all the arrangements for the ceremony and paid for everything herself. However, Bruce was absent. He had backed out of the wedding, running away with $3,000 from their joint account, which they had been saving for their honeymoon. Instead of marrying Dea, he went to Palm Springs by himself and spent all the money on his own enjoyment. This decision also ended his relationship with Dea. In the following years, Bruce dated several women, but his greed led to the failure of those relationships as well. Friends noted that he was consistently the cause of the breakups, as none of his relationships lasted long due to his obsession with money. This continued until Bruce turned 30. During this time, he met Elena Luca, and they eventually married and had a son named Matthew in 2001. Tragically, when Matthew was only 1 year old, an accident occurred. While Elena went to the store for a while, Matthew was in Bruce's care. But Matthew fell into the pool in their yard. When Elena returned, she found Bruce and their son not breathing. It is unclear why Bruce did not call for help or attempt to resuscitate Matthew. Elena quickly called 911. Although doctors were able to revive Matthew, he suffered severe, irreversible brain damage that left him partially paralyzed for the rest of his life. Bruce's erratic behavior led Elena to suspect that he wanted to abandon their child, whom he seemed to find uninteresting. Bruce then chose to leave Elena and their disabled child, without providing any financial support. This left Elena in a difficult situation, as she was not working and in dire need of help. Despite her constant requests and innuendos, Bruce chose to ignore her, avoiding all contact with Matthew and ignoring Elena's pleas. By the time of the tragic events, the medical bills had exceeded $35,000, and with no payment agreement in place, Elena turned to the court for help. She was later awarded a monthly payment of $240, but the amount was not enough to care for a disabled child. When Sylvia discovered his past actions, she chose to end their marriage. She was outraged by Bruce's lack of concern for their son, which made it impossible for her to stay with him. Consequently, she filed for divorce. The court ordered Bruce to pay Sylvia a one-time settlement of $10,000, which was significantly less than what he had withdrawn from their joint account. Additionally, he was required to pay monthly alimony. Sylvia also retained her engagement ring and the dog they had adopted during their marriage. The division of their real estate was still being decided in court. Bruce's ideal life began to crumble. Not only did he go through a costly divorce, but he also lost his job, which made his financial situation worse. Accustomed to a high standard of living, he could no longer maintain his previous lifestyle. They believed that during this trying time, Bruce hatched a sinister plan for revenge. Just before Christmas, Bruce purchased 2 handguns, an air compressor, a high-octane flamethrower, and a custom-made Santa Claus suit. He used these items in the murders of the Ortega family on December 24th. After the murders, Bruce contacted the police to report a vehicle parked in front of his Pasadena home. When the license plate was checked, police discovered that the Dodge Caliber had been rented by Bruce Pardo. The vehicle was equipped for long-distance travel, with everything needed for an escape, including a laptop, several sets of clothes, food, and maps of both Mexico and the United States. It is possible that Bruce had planned to flee the country after the murder, but then changed his plans. In the trunk of his car, police discovered 4 pistols with 13-round magazines and about 200 rounds of ammunition. As a result of these events, a tragic array of consequences ensued. 13 children were left without parents. The massacre could have been much worse had the children been present at the Christmas gathering. Following the attack, custody of the surviving children was granted to their uninjured family members. One of the hardest-hit victims was a girl named Katrina, who was shot in the head while greeting Santa Claus at the entrance of the house. Surgeons fought to save her life, and miraculously, they succeeded. However, she endured a long and difficult recovery thereafter. Toxicology tests revealed that Bruce Pardo was under the influence of illegal substances during the attack, which amplified his violent behavior. It also emerged that he had booked a flight for Christmas morning. Given his chaotic mental state, he frequently changed his plans. Just half an hour after the massacre, he purchased a ticket to Canada. His intention may have been to flee. Police later discovered that Bruce had intended to stop in Minnesota, where a close friend lived. In the days before the murders, he had called the friend to express his plans to visit. However, it is still unclear whether Bruce actually intended to make the visit or if it was just a hoax to fool the police. The police also discovered that Bruce may have been plotting to kill his biological mother, as she was the one who informed Sylvia about Bruce's disabled child. In addition, his mother still maintained a close relationship with Sylvia and the entire Ortega family. She was supposed to be at the Christmas party, but she was sick that day so could not attend, so she escaped death. Despite his controversial nature, those who knew Bruce had never previously witnessed aggression from him. He was typically calm and balanced, albeit greedy and cunning. Police theorized that a tumultuous divorce, financial worries, job loss, and an obsession with money pushed Bruce onto the path of crime. The case of Kathy Krausnak. On February 19, 1982, police were called to the Krausnak family home, where they discovered the body of 29-year-old Kathy Krausnak. An axe was found embedded in her head, the only fatal wound. Earlier, Kathy's 30-year-old husband, James Krausnak, had run into a neighbor's house while holding their 3-year-old daughter. He was covered in blood and appeared distressed, reporting that his wife showed no signs of life. While crying and agitated, he waited for police to arrive. James told police that he had left for work at Kodak around 6:30 a.m., where he worked as an economist. He spent the day completing routine tasks while his wife, Kathy, and their daughter, Sarah, were still asleep at home. Kathy had planned to spend the day with their daughter. When James returned home around 5 p.m., he noticed the garage door open, the kitchen window broken, and the glass door between the garage and the house shattered. Realizing something was wrong, he went inside and found his wife lying on the bed. He was shocked and momentarily unable to speak. He then noticed his 3-year-old daughter lying next to the bed, unharmed. To ensure her safety, James took his daughter to a neighbor's house. The neighbor opened the door and saw James, who was frightened and crying. At his request, she called 911, asking them to come quickly because he claimed there had been a murder. Police spoke to Sarah, who seemed unaware of what had happened. She said she saw a multicolored bad guy on her parents' bed and saw her mother with blood on her face. It is extremely distressing for a child to be left alone in an apartment with a murdered mother for an entire day. This was a disturbing aspect of the case. Fortunately, Sarah was too young to fully understand the situation, so it did not affect her mental state much. The neighbors did not observe or hear anything unusual. The police investigated the crime scene but did not find any significant evidence or clues. The murder weapon, an axe, was taken from Kathy's family garage. It had been used to cut the grass. Notably, there were no fingerprints on the axe, suggesting that it had been deliberately cleaned. In addition, forensic experts found no fingerprints inside the house, which was puzzling since 3 people lived there and could have touched many objects. The police found this strange and assumed that the perpetrator had cleaned the entire house. However, the police did notice something strange in the kitchen. A damp bathroom rug was drying in the garage. James claimed that he had no idea why the rug was there and that nothing of note had been found on it. In 1982, forensic techniques did not allow for the collection or analysis of DNA. Police suspected that the incident was a botched robbery, theorizing that the attackers may have become frightened and decided to eliminate Kathy, a potential witness. However, some valuables were still intact. Kathy's bag, which had been left in the kitchen, had been emptied onto the floor, but the contents, money, jewelry, and expensive tea sets, were all there and neatly arranged. This raised an important question: why did the criminals leave these items behind? Even the cash that was openly left on the dresser had not been taken. Perhaps the criminal had scared Kathy, but in this case, fingerprints would have been left on these items. Yet, there were none, which was puzzling. This behavior was unusual, and the police noticed these discrepancies, raising suspicions that the crime scene had been staged. Some items were arranged in a way that suggested they were deliberately placed there. A crucial reason for dismissing robbery as a motive was that nothing had been stolen. Seasoned police officers, who regularly dealt with burglaries, immediately recognized that this incident was different. While murders were rare in Brighton, thefts and robberies occurred almost daily. Police believed that Kathy's death was a premeditated murder. The initial suspect was, of course, her husband, who discovered her body. Police began investigating James. James's friends and acquaintances described them as a happy, even idealistic couple. They had both grown up in the same Michigan city. Kathy came from a family of truck drivers, while James's parents owned a successful carpet store. They met in high school and began dating in college, eventually marrying on May 3, 1974. After their marriage, Kathy continued her studies in economics in Colorado, and in 1978, they celebrated the birth of their daughter, Sarah. Meanwhile, James became interested in further education and pursued a doctorate in economics. James then took a teaching position at the University of Lynchburg in Virginia. In 1981, the family relocated to Brighton, New York, where James found a job as an economist. Kathy was a devoted and caring mother to their daughter, always attentive and loving. However, friends noticed a significant change in Kathy's mood 6 months before her death. She became unusually irritable and restless, though they did not know the reasons behind her behavior. As the police investigated the family's situation, they discovered that things were not as perfect as they initially appeared. The couple kept their problems private, never discussing their issues publicly or seeking advice from others, which made it difficult to gather information. However, police found a brochure for marriage counseling in the family car, suggesting that there had been ongoing discord in their relationship. The police also contacted James's employer and learned that he had misrepresented his qualifications, claiming to have a doctorate. This deception led to him being assigned a role he was unqualified for, resulting in stress at work and further complicating his situation. James's cooperation helped the police gather information, and James agreed to attend the next meeting for questioning, but he did not attend. Less than 24 hours after the murder, he left the city without informing the police. This action of his made the police suspicious. He was intentionally fleeing. Police later discovered that James had gone to his parents' home in Michigan. They found him again and questioned him. He cooperated with the police by providing blood and hair samples for analysis. Unfortunately, DNA testing was not available at the time, so this did not yield any useful results. 10 days after Kathy was found dead in her bed, James hired a lawyer. The police did not have enough evidence to bring any charges in 1982. Police focused on information that James had left for work at 6:30 a.m. It was important to verify this detail and determine whether he could have been home at the time of the murder. Forensic examinations showed that Kathy had died in her sleep between 4:30 and 7:30 a.m., meaning she could have been murdered with an axe shortly after James left for work. While it was possible that the husband had committed the crime before leaving, it was difficult to understand why he would do so and then go to work, leaving their 3-year-old daughter behind. The mother's body remained in the house throughout the day. The investigation stalled. The evidence collected and the documents found did not shed light on the events of that morning. The James had no clear motive, making a jury trial unlikely. If the prosecution lost, they would not be able to bring new charges against him. In 1997, James met his old friend Sharon at a trade show. Their relationship quickly blossomed, and James asked her out, which she accepted. Sharon noticed that James was still deeply affected by his past loss. He seemed shocked by the traumatic event. James shared the basics of that terrible day with Sharon but avoided going into detail, and Sharon did not want to press him for more information. Their mutual understanding helped strengthen their relationship, and they later married. In 1999, they moved to another city, then moved across the country. At the same time, police continued their efforts on Kathy's case. New police re-examined the evidence, leading to the analysis of a large number of items related to the case. The police were committed to finding justice for the woman who had been so brutally murdered. In 2015, the FBI assisted Brighton police in their investigation, which led them to focus on a suspect, Kathy's husband, James. On April 16, 2016, 34 years after the murder, police made a surprise visit to James's home, hoping to meet him and possibly uncover inconsistencies in his previous statements. However, their plan did not go as planned. James appeared calm and welcoming. He chatted with the officers, agreed to have the conversation recorded, and did not request an attorney. They talked for an hour at the kitchen table, but James remained calm throughout the conversation. Eventually, one of the police asked him directly if he had anything to do with his wife's death. James was angry, said that he would never hurt his wife. Sharon defended him, saying that in all the time they were together, she had never witnessed any aggressive behavior from him. He was a caring and loving husband who would never lay a hand on her. She firmly believed that he was incapable of such cruelty. Sharon also participated in the police interrogation. Throughout the interrogation, she never doubted her husband's innocence. She felt that she had seen his sincere heart and kind nature over the years. Although her views seemed naive, she held these beliefs deeply. She never asked about the fate of James' ex-wife, as she was satisfied with the brief explanation he gave at the beginning of their relationship and never mentioned it again. Police found themselves at a dead end once again, prompting the decision to review all the evidence collected for DNA testing, nearly 40 years after the crime. The murder weapon, an axe found in the victim's head, was sent to the FBI for analysis. Unfortunately, they were unable to locate any usable DNA on it because it had been tampered with. This was a significant setback. The police then sought to determine when the crime had occurred. One of the United States' leading forensic experts, Michael Baden, analyzed all the available information about the body. He concluded that the woman had likely died around 3:30 a.m., based on her body temperature and the amount of undigested food in her stomach. Therefore, when James arrived at work at 6:30 a.m., he would have definitely noticed that something was wrong. Police were skeptical of the idea of a botched robbery because nothing was taken. They questioned why the robbers would kill a woman who was sleeping and did not witness the robbery. This conflict led to the filing of murder charges. On November 8, 2019, James was arrested after being charged, but the 67-year-old did not confess to the crime. Police used the time of death to investigate a murder that had occurred 40 years earlier. They found evidence that a robbery had been staged. With this information, law enforcement and James presented their case to the jury, focusing on James' alleged involvement in the murder of Kathy Krausnack, his first wife. During the police, investigators discovered a dangerous criminal named Edla Rabbi, who lived about a mile and a half from Kathy's home in 1982. Rabbi was notorious for his harmful taste in women. Despite being arrested several times, Rabbi often received light sentences and served a total of more than 32 years in prison before his death in 2014. He confessed to killing Kathy but gave many inaccurate details, leading to skepticism about his claims. After each time in custody, he hunted for new victims, torturing them. His first confirmed murder occurred in 1991 when he strangled a 27-year-old woman named Stephanie Kupczynski. Although he confessed to the crime in 2012, he maintained that he had no intention of killing her and that the situation had spiraled out of control. Shortly before Kathy's murder, Rabbi had been released from prison in the 1980s. He was questioned and the investigation began, but was not considered a likely suspect. Police questioned him briefly and then released him. As a result, James's lawyers claimed the police were negligent. Instead of pursuing the real killer, they chose to blame the grieving husband, James, who they considered the prime suspect. This situation had a significant impact on society. It was revealed that not only was the criminal dead by the time the case was revisited, but the police who investigated it in the 1980s were also deceased, meaning they could not be held accountable for any mistakes. During the original police, the police had only spoken to the murderer once and then disregarded him entirely. Since Edla Rabbi had passed away, he could not be questioned to clarify his role in the case. Nevertheless, many involved in the investigation still questioned whether he was connected to Kathy's murder. Although he confessed to killing Kathy before his death, numerous inconsistencies arose in his account, particularly regarding the handwriting, which did not resemble his at all. This conclusion was reached by all the experts who examined his case. First, he had a history of rape rather than robbery, yet no signs of sexual assault were found. Additionally, the murder weapon, an axe, was not typical of his methods, and the handwriting was evidently different. As a result, police did not consider him a suspect. Years ago, the prosecution was leaning towards the theory that Kathy's husband was her killer rather than a nearby maniac. During the trial, the prosecutor presented the time of death as crucial evidence. However, several defense experts disagreed with the assertion that Kathy died early, with most believing it occurred before 6:30 in the morning. It is believed that Kathy died at 6:30 a.m. after her husband left for work. The investigation was complicated by the fact that Kathy was under an electric blanket, and it was unclear whether it was on or off at the time of her death. If it was on, the temperature it reached was unknown. Experts attempted to estimate the time of death by analyzing the drop in body temperature. Ultimately, there is no reliable method for determining the exact time of death. Experts have differed, resulting in a margin of error of several hours. Another piece of evidence cited by the police was a shoe imprint found pressing down on a garbage bag at the crime scene. This imprint resembled the shoes worn by Kathy's husband, who was absent at the time of her death. However, this evidence alone was not enough to establish his guilt. The prosecutor argued that the husband was the only possible suspect because he had a motive stemming from family issues. After lengthy deliberations at the hearing, the verdict was announced in court. The jury were unanimous in only one opinion, that the crime was too confusing and contradictory, and the evidence too dubious and easily dismissed. Despite this, James Krausnak was convicted of second-degree murder in November 2022 and sentenced to 25 years in prison. The verdict came as a shock to many, especially to those close to James who knew him well. They had remained certain that James was not guilty because there was no serious evidence of his involvement. James himself also asserted his innocence. The case of Natalia Martinez. Natalia Martinez was born in the late 1980s in Montevideo, the capital of Uruguay, and she was the youngest daughter in her family. While not much is known about her personality, she had a close relationship with her relatives, especially her older sister, Claudia. Her father was a senior salesman for a large international company that sold household appliances, which allowed the family to live comfortably. Natalia was a cheerful and friendly girl. During her teenage years, she formed a close-knit group of friends who supported one another during difficult times. These friends later described her as sociable and able to connect easily with strangers. After graduating from high school, Natalia began spending more time with her friends. They enjoyed going to various parties and eventually expanded their adventures by visiting the beaches of Uruguay for fun. To celebrate her 19th birthday on January 1st, 2007, Natalia and her friends planned a trip to La Paloma, a small resort town, where they stayed for 2 weeks. On January 16th, they traveled to a nearby resort in the city of Reales, where Natalia was delighted to meet her parents and sister, who were there for a 4-day vacation. The Natalia family had a wonderful time enjoying beach activities and were well known in the town, as they frequently visited. They often returned to the same places, making it feel like a second home. On January 18th, Natalia and her sister Claudia decided to drive to Punta del Este, another tourist town less than an hour away from Reales. They planned to stop at a popular local spa located about halfway between the two towns in the Serra San Antonio area. After their beauty treatment, the girls planned to go to a disco with 3 of Natalia's friends. However, as the evening approached, Claudia felt very tired and decided to go home to their parents. Despite this, 19-year-old Natalia Martinez was determined to stick to her plans. She wanted to enjoy herself, so she went with her friends to a popular party at the local nightclub, La Air in Canada, where they stayed until around 5 a.m. As morning approached, the girls decided to leave the party and head home. At that time, Natalia was talking with a man named Leonardo Rockovin, an old acquaintance who owned a bookstore. They stopped near the exit and continued their conversation. However, Natalia became so engrossed in her discussion with Leonardo that her friends decided to go outside and get into the car they had arrived in, planning to head home together. The girls got tired and got into the car. One of them decided to check on Natalia, but when they returned to the nightclub, they found that Natalia and Leonardo were gone. The friends realized that Natalia could not have left alone or with anyone else without letting them know. Since they did not see her leave, they began to worry. They went up to the second floor, out of the bar, and saw Leonardo's BMW in the parking lot. The owner was inside the car, and because the windows were tinted, Rosalia and Silva could not see if anyone was in the passenger seat. However, they did notice some movement inside the car. The girls called out to Leonardo to ask about Natalia. He said he was in the car with a friend and mentioned that he had spoken to Natalia briefly before they parted ways. He claimed he had no idea what happened to her afterward or why she didn't return to her friends. The girls assumed Natalia had gone home, so they got into the car and drove to her friend's relatives, who were at the police station, just a 10-minute drive from the club. Rosalia and Silva stopped near the house and honked to get Claudia's attention, trying not to wake the entire family. However, no one responded, so they returned to the club where they last saw Natalia. The girls continued to search for their friend for about 2 hours, but their efforts were unsuccessful. No one knew where she had gone. Around 8 a.m., Silva returned home, exhausted and very worried about her missing friend. Worried about her friend's safety, she decided to tell her parents everything that had happened. She feared something bad might have happened to her friend. Her parents tried to reassure her, telling her to rest and that her friend was probably already home. So, she went to bed. Yet, when she woke up at 11 a.m. that same day, her concerns grew stronger. The entire Natalia family started searching for she. They quickly got involved, and her friends went to the club together to find out what happened. Unfortunately, they were still unsuccessful. The club was closed, and no one had any helpful information. They searched the surrounding area for clues but found nothing. Around 5 p.m., Natalia's family and friends arrived at the police station. Maldonado police investigators received several photos, including one of all the girls relaxing at a club that evening. This helped them understand what the missing girl was wearing so they could come up with a description for the search. The police took their statements seriously and began investigating. Initially, the family said that Natalia had been at a party where she may have had too much to drink and left with someone. However, Rosalia and Silva insisted that Natalia had not consumed any alcohol that night, as she often denied. They also dismissed the police's suspicions that they had used illegal drugs. Police began a search operation. They first went to the location where Natalia was last seen. The club was open, but there were no surveillance cameras at the time. Police spoke to club employees and learned that a group of 3 young men sitting at a nearby table had been trying to approach the women throughout the evening. Natalia's friends confirmed that the men had been harassing them. Despite this information, police ignored the group of young men and instead focused on the acquaintance with whom Natalia had been talking before she disappeared. It was no surprise that Leonardo immediately became the prime suspect, since he was the last person to see Natalia. However, all of Leonardo's acquaintances described him as a kind and calm person who had never shown any signs of cruelty before and was incapable of harming anyone. He was a young businessman. That night, his girlfriend waited for him in the car while he was talking to Natalia. After that, he said goodbye to Natalia and returned to the car with his girlfriend. From the car, he saw Natalia go down the stairs and go out onto the porch. From that moment on, Leonardo was distracted by his conversation with his girlfriend and did not see Natalia again. However, he was not worried about her, since he did not notice anything suspicious around. No one was screaming or making noise. Despite the police suspicions, Leonardo insisted he had nothing to do with Natalia's disappearance. However, the police did not trust him. They needed to conduct a thorough examination of the BMW he drove away in after the party. Several witnesses reported seeing a similar car in various locations around the city, including near a forest on the outskirts. One man claimed he spotted a couple having sex in a car that matched the description on the night she went missing, near a lake by the woods. Police obtained a search warrant for Leonardo's car. During the initial inspection, they found a long, dark hair on the floor of the BMW and sent it for analysis. However, it did not match Natalia. It belonged to someone else. The interior of the car showed no signs of suspicious activity, no blood, or evidence of a struggle. Police speculated that Leonardo had cleaned the car shortly after Natalia Martinez disappeared, which would explain the clean condition of the car. Police used this detail as part of the evidence against Leonardo. However, they still lacked the evidence to arrest him. On January 22nd, a passerby driving on the outskirts of Polis discovered several items on the roadside. Among them were a woman's handbag containing a wallet and a pair of women's shoes. The most crucial piece of evidence was linked to Natalia Martinez, a case that was currently receiving significant media attention. Recognizing the situation, the witness promptly contacted the police. Unfortunately, the media coverage also led to the spread of various rumors, which Natalia's family had to repeatedly deny. One such rumor suggested that Natalia was involved with drug dealers, implying that she had become a victim of criminal activities. However, Natalia's father publicly refuted these claims in an official television statement. Despite the situation, rumors continued to spread. Some claimed to have witnessed her being attacked or even murdered. Instead of receiving assistance from the media, police found themselves overwhelmed by numerous false testimonies each day that needed to be verified, complicating the investigation. Meanwhile, the media eagerly reported even the most outrageous theories. The story was considered compelling and attracted many readers, causing journalists to add fuel to the fire of chaos surrounding the case. The rumors about the missing girl were leveraged to boost newspaper sales. Natalia's family endured immense pain following her disappearance. A large-scale search operation was organized, involving many police officers, friends, family members, and hundreds of volunteers. It was quickly determined that there was no evidence of the girl near the nightclub, prompting the search to extend into more distant areas of Uruguay. Ultimately, the entire coast was thoroughly searched. Most of the search operations took place on land, using service dogs, and later involving military and civilian aircraft. The City Fire Brigade also participated in the search and requested that the sewer systems be inspected. However, no traces of Natalia were found there either. By this point, law enforcement had largely concluded that Natalia was deceased, as the likelihood of finding her alive was very low. The critical window for finding missing persons is usually 48 hours. A significant finding occurred when a bone was discovered on the Grande Plateau, but tests revealed it was not human. Although the search had stalled and no new leads had emerged, Natalia's relatives continued their efforts. They remained hopeful that she was alive and being held against her will. In 2000, a female body was discovered in the forest near Lake Yolo. The body was in poor condition and was sent for examination to determine the identity of the deceased. This location was several kilometers from the club where Natalia was last seen, and the clothing found on the body led police to suspect it might belong to the missing Natalia Martinez. After the discovery of the body, police remembered a couple who had been seen having sex in a car near the forest, which drew attention to that area. The forensic expert who performed the autopsy struggled to gather important information because the body was in an advanced state of decomposition. To ensure a thorough examination, 5 forensic experts were called in. They determined that the body belonged to Natalia Martinez. Their overall assessments suggested that she likely did not die of natural causes, as there were faint signs of strangulation on her neck. Although they ruled out poisoning from substances or alcohol, they could not find evidence of physical or sexual violence due to the body's condition. It was noteworthy that the victim was found tied with nylon thread, but it remained unclear whether this occurred before or after her death. Several months later, while the investigation continued, an unexpected development arose. The man who had found her belongings on the roadside was discovered dead at the bottom of a cliff near his home. His name was initially kept confidential. Initially, it appeared that the man had voluntarily chosen to end his life. However, all his relatives insisted that he would never do such a thing. He was a deeply religious man, cherished his life, and loved his family. An autopsy revealed that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, sustained long before the fall from the cliff, suggesting he had been thrown off. This led police to believe the two cases were linked. But more evidence was needed. The next tragic event involved Natalia's father, Ever Martinez. He had fallen into a deep depression after his daughter's death and the damaging rumors that were circulating about their family. He ended his life at home by shooting himself in the head. His body was discovered by his daughter Claudia and his wife. The police closed the case after confirming that he had acted alone, a conclusion that the family accepted. For a long time, police struggled to make progress in the investigation into Natalia's murder. However, new information emerged from text messages exchanged with a friend just days before Natalia's death. In these conversations, Natalia mentioned a man she had recently met online. It was later discovered that he was one of the men who had been at the nightclub on the day Natalia went missing. These three young men were sitting at a nearby table, and several witnesses had pointed them out from the beginning of the investigation, but this information was overlooked. Police identified all three suspects, who were slightly older than Natalia. After interviewing them, the police became even more suspicious of their involvement, as the men contradicted each other in their statements about where they were and what they did during the night and morning of that tragic day. After this, the police interviewed a witness whose identity was kept confidential for her safety. She was the girlfriend of one of the men who had been arrested. Her testimony revealed that a young man in the group, Rodrigo Verghese, was involved in Natalia's murder. At the time, he was 25 years old, and police later stated that he had previously provided false statements. During the interrogation, police recorded phone conversations that implicated the Rodrigo main suspect. They collected DNA samples from him, but these were not helpful for the investigation due to the advanced decomposition of the remains. After that, the police reached out to the friends and relatives of the Rodrigo. A young man was called to testify on June 8, 2010, along with his friends who had been at a nightclub on the night of Natalia's murder. They all claimed they had no involvement in the incident. They stated that after spending the night at the club, they hired a sex worker to join them in their continued festivities. However, they denied any connection to Natalia. Rodrigo, the prime suspect, denied spending time with the murdered woman and claimed he did not know her. However, messages from the girl revealed that they had spoken online and planned to meet at a party, suggesting that Rodrigo had lied. Initial questioning did not turn up any clues, but a day later, police spoke to the young people again in the hope of getting a confession. This time, Rodrigo confessed. He explained that he had met Natalia online, and after chatting for a while, they decided to meet at a club. Unfortunately, their conversation did not go well, and as dawn approached, he suggested they go to another nearby nightclub. Rodrigo misled her. He wanted to be alone with her. During this time, he began to harass her, according to his confession. When she rejected his advances, he seemed to accept it. However, Natalia then suffered an asthma attack, which led to convulsions and ultimately her death, as she did not have her inhaler or any medication with her. Rodrigo was confused and unable to help her. He stated that he panicked during her attack and didn't know what to do, especially when she stopped showing signs of life in his car. After the party, he planned to return to his family's farm, a short distance from the city. However, after Natalia's death, he decided to dispose of her body to avoid any further repercussions. He headed for the woods, thinking it would be a good place to hide her. There, he tied Natalia up, dragged her deeper into the woods, and covered her body with branches. But this was only part of the story. A witness walking along the beach claimed to have seen a couple having sex, and Natalia's body showed signs of strangulation. It seems that Rodrigo neglected to mention that he had strangled and raped her at the same time. Police were later able to confirm that Rodrigo's other friends were not involved in the incident, so they were released shortly after Rodrigo confessed. Rodrigo was formally charged with murder and taken into custody. After the confession, it appeared that the prosecutor's office would easily prove the Rodrigo's guilt. However, in mid-2010, as preliminary hearings began, Rodrigo Verghese recanted his confession. He claimed he admitted to the murder under police pressure and insisted he did not commit the crime. This assertion seemed unlikely because his confession included numerous details only the actual killer would know, including the precise location where the girl's body was found. Still, Rodrigo maintained his innocence. Despite the evidence against him, his defense team supported his statement and sought to demonstrate that Rodrigo was not at the club that night. They presented mobile phone data and a statement from his employer confirming that he had been working his usual evening shift that day. The next day, he attended a friend's wedding, and no one noticed anything unusual about his behavior. On September 2, 2010, Leonardo Rockovin, the bookstore owner who was initially the main suspect in the investigation, was called as a key witness for the prosecution. Leonardo testified that during a conversation, he had an argument with a young man. Leonardo identified the young man as Rodrigo. This indicated that Rodrigo was definitely at the nightclub and not at work. Natalia's friends also confirmed that he was at the nightclub that night. Forensic experts, working with the prosecution, provided insights based on the autopsy results. They noted that, due to the typical symptoms of asthma, the girl could not have died from an asthma attack so quickly. While she did experience an asthma attack, it could not have occurred instantaneously. It took several hours. Additionally, there were signs of strangulation on the victim's neck, which was likely the cause of death. Unfortunately, the experts could not provide further details about the victim's injuries. From late August to mid-September 2010, the prosecution successfully constructed a narrative of the crime, leading to Rodrigo Verghese being found guilty of Natalia Martinez's murder. He received a 9-year prison sentence. However, in February 2011, Rodrigo's lawyer submitted an appeal, claiming that the court's ruling was incorrect and that the prosecution was biased. The lawyer argued that they failed to present a witness to the kidnapping or murder, nor did they provide any compelling direct evidence. Natalia's family expressed disappointment, saying that the criminal received a lighter sentence than the family had expected. Disappointed by this leniency, Natalia's relatives filed a civil lawsuit against Rodrigo Verghese for causing harm to Natalia's family, holding him responsible for her father's death. Initially, they mentioned that Rodrigo should pay $15 in damages. However, after further discussion, both parties agreed to increase the amount of damages to $7,000. The court rejected the request for a longer sentence. On October 27, 2014, the lawyer achieved his goal when Rodrigo, 29, was pardoned after serving only 4 years and 2 months in prison. His release was largely due to his good behavior while in custody.